When a smug white cop pulls over a black man in a quiet Baltimore neighborhood, he sees an easy target: a tall, unassuming gardener driving a beat-up truck, probably just another local to intimidate. Officer James Sullivan leans into the window, barking orders with a sneer, his words laced with racial venom. He expects compliance, fears submission. What he doesn't know is that Elijah Eli Harper is a former Delta Force operator trained in combat stealth and survival. When Sullivan draws his gun, Eli moves like a shadow, disarming him in seconds, leaving him sprawled on the pavement, stunned and humiliated. The teenager in the passenger seat, Talia, captures it all on her phone. The video could go viral, but the real fight is just beginning. Sullivan's threats are closing in, and Eli's not backing down. He's ready to fight back. If you're reading this, drop a comment with where you're from. And stick around, because this story's next chapter is one you won't want to miss. Elijah Harper knelt in the soft earth of his backyard garden, the late April sun warming his broad shoulders. The scent of damp soil and budding basil grounded him, a ritual that kept the ghosts of his past at bay. At 47, Eli's hands, scarred from years of wielding weapons, now cradled a tomato seedling, tucking it gently into a raised bed. His close-cropped hair flecked with gray, and the lines around his dark eyes told of a life heavy with duty and loss. This small plot in Baltimore's Ashwood neighborhood, a proud, predominantly black community of modest homes, was his sanctuary, a place to grow life instead of ending it. Too deep, and it won't thrive, his grandmother's voice echoed from childhood summers in Georgia. Plants need room to grow, Eli, just like us. He smiled faintly, patting the soil. His garden was modest: kale peppers, herbs, a butterfly bush alive with early pollinators. Each root tethered him to this quiet life, each harvest a step away from the bloodshed of his Delta Force days. Those tomatoes coming along, Mr. Harper. Mrs. Clara Thompson called over the fence, her cane steadying her frail frame. The elderly neighbor's warm voice carried the weight of Ashwood's history. "Should be a good crop, Mrs. Thompson." Eli replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'll bring you some for that gumbo." "You're too kind," she said, her smile fading. "Reminds me of when this neighborhood was all Victory Gardens, folks sharing everything. Now we got police cruising like we're the enemy." Eli nodded, feeling the sting of her words. Ashwood was changing: gentrification, creeping in, police stops targeting black residents with flimsy excuses. Yet the community held tight, neighbors like Mrs. Thompson becoming family. He adjusted the cucumber vines on their trellises, his hands moving with a precision honed in combat, an irony he couldn't ignore. A breeze rustled the old oak, shading his yard, its whisper a stark contrast to the gunfire that still haunted his dreams. Here there was only birdsong and kids playing basketball down the street. His phone buzzed. "Pick up Talia, Tadri 2, 30 p.m. Eli gathered his tools, placing them in the toolbox his sister Lena had given him before cancer took her. His movements were efficient, a soldier's discipline never fully shed. In the kitchen, he scrubbed dirt from his nails, the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of a wall clock grounding him. His reflection in the window showed a man marked by time, but unbowed, his posture still that of a warrior. Keys jingled as he grabbed them from the hook. His faded blue pickup, honest about its age, waited in the driveway, a deliberate choice, far from the armored vehicles of his past. The screen door creaked as he stepped out, a reminder to oil it later. Mr. Vernon Lewis, watering his lawn, waved. Eli returned the gesture, cherishing the normalcy. At Ashwood High, students spilled out, and Talia's purple backpack stood out. Her braids bounced as she jogged to the truck, grinning. "Uncle Eli, you smell like dirt again." "Honest work," Eli said, his deep voice warm. How's that math test? Talia groaned. A nightmare. Can we talk dinner? Spicy shrimp stir-fry deal. Eli chuckled, pulling onto Maple Street. Got an A on your history project, though. Proud of you. Talia scrolled her phone. It counts right. Counts for a lot. Eli glanced at her, seeing Lena's spark in her eyes. Raising Talia was his promise to his sister a normal life, free of violence. Uncle Eli Talia's voice tightened police car behind us. Eli's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. A tactical cruiser tailed too close. He kept his speed-steady hands at 10 and 2. Stay calm, Talia. Lights flashed. Eli pulled over smoothly, 2 blocks from home engine off hands visible. 2 officers approached. Officer James Sullivan, white with hard eyes and a swagger, tapped the window. License and registration. He snapped his gaze, dripping with disdain. Why were we stopped? Officer Eli's voice was steady, but his pulse quickened. I said, license and registration, boy. Sullivan's sneer and the word boy cut like a blade. Talia's phone discreetly recorded. My license is in my pocket. I'm reaching for it, Eli said, moving slowly. Step out. Sullivan yanked the door open, hand on his holster. The younger officer, Daniel Hayes, stood silent, tense. This is harassment, Eli said. I want your supervisor. Playing lawyer Sullivan grabbed Eli's arm. Get out, or I drag you out. Hands off, Eli warned, his body tensing. Sullivan drew his gun, shouting, he's reaching gun. The shot rang out. Eli twisted, deflecting Sullivan's wrist, the gun hitting the pavement. Using Sullivan's momentum, Eli flipped him onto his back, a dull thud as air left his lungs. Talia ducked as Hayes drew his weapon. Eli fired 2 precise shots, Sullivan's dropped pistol hitting each officer's thigh. They collapsed, screaming. A bruised wrist throbbed, a reminder Eli wasn't untouchable. Don't, Eli told Hayes, who froze. Talia, to me. Low. Talia scrambled out, phone in hand. Eli backed them away, scanning for threats. Neighbors peeked out. Inside, he shouted. Sullivan, bloodied, grabbed his radio. Officer down, black male armed, dangerous, sirens wailed. Eli spotted Mrs. Thompson's open gate. Talia, run to Reverend Tate's through the alley. Don't stop. Talia nodded, trembling but resolute. You're dead, Sullivan roared. Eli met Hayes's eyes. You saw the truth. To Talia, run. They vanished through the gate as sirens closed in. The alley behind Mrs. Clara Thompson's house smelled of wet pavement and rust, the narrow path cloaked in dusk's lengthening shadows. Elijah Eli Harper moved with silent precision, his niece Talia close behind her, breaths, sharp but controlled. Her phone, still clutched tightly, held the video of Officer James Sullivan's unprovoked attack, a ticking bomb that could either save them or doom them. Sirens wailed closer, their shrill cries cutting through Baltimore's Ashwood neighborhood like predators closing in. Eli's bruised wrist throbbed, a reminder of the cost of even a brief clash with Sullivan's rage-fueled arrogance. He scanned rooftops and corners, his Delta Force training mapping escape routes as naturally as breathing. Reverend Marcus Tate's church was 3 blocks away, a sanctuary if they could reach it. Stay low, Talia, Eli whispered, guiding her past a rusted dumpster. Her purple backpack bounced lightly, the only sound in their careful retreat. At 16, Talia was no stranger to Ashwood's tensions, but the raw fear in her eyes betrayed how close Sullivan's bullet had come. Eli's jaw tightened. He'd promised his sister Lena a safe life for her daughter. Now that promise hung by a thread. They slipped through the church's side gate, the old oak door creaking as Reverend Tate ushered them into the basement. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of old hymnals and polished wood. You're safe here, Tate said, his deep voice steady, but laced with worry. Police are going door to door, but they won't touch this church without a warrant. Not yet. Thank you, Reverend. Eli said, his posture, rigid eyes still scanning. Talia sank onto a worn couch, her phone trembling in her hands. Tate handed them cups of tea, but Eli didn't drink, his focus on the small basement window where red and blue lights flickered outside. "Who are you?" Uncle Eli. Talia's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes searching his face. The man who'd taught her to plant tomatoes and laughed at her bad math grades was gone, replaced by someone who moved like a weapon. That wasn't just self-defense. That was military. Eli met her gaze, the weight of secrets pressing down. "I'm still your uncle," he said softly. "But yeah, I was Delta Force. 20 years. Counterterrorism hostage rescue missions you won't find in any record." He rubbed his bruised wrist, the ache grounding him. "I thought I'd left that behind. Why didn't you tell me?" Talia's voice cracked a mix of awe and betrayal. "To keep you safe," Eli said. "After your mom died, I wanted you to have a normal life. No shadows, no violence." He paused, the memory of Lena's hospital bed sharp. "I failed." Reverend Tate settled into an armchair. "Truth has a way of coming out, Brother Eli. Maybe it's time to use who you are to protect more than just Talia." Before Eli could respond, a sharp knock echoed from upstairs. Tate rose, motioning for silence. "Stay here." He returned minutes later with Malcolm Reed, a wiry black man in his late 40s, his face lined from years of living off the grid. Malcolm, a former military cybersecurity expert, and Eli's old squad mate, carried a laptop bag and a grim expression. "Took you long enough," Reaper Malcolm said, using Eli's old call sign. "Heard you made a mess out there." "Had no choice," Eli replied, shaking Malcolm's hand. "Thanks for coming." Malcolm set up his laptop on a folding table, screens glowing with data streams. That stop wasn't random. Sullivan's unit has been hitting Ashwood hard raids, arrests, evictions, all in black neighborhoods. He pulled up a map dotted with red pins. Every targeted property gets scooped up by City View Development Group within weeks. Shell companies offshore accounts the works. Talia leaned in, her tech-savvy mind racing. "They're forcing people out for profit," she said, her voice hardening. "Using cops to do it." "Exactly," Malcolm said, typing rapidly. "Sullivan's crew gets cash deposits for their trouble. Police-grade encryption on these files, but sloppy. I cracked it in an hour." His military background made the task plausible, though it still took skill to bypass department protocols. Talia pulled out her phone, her fingers flying. "I'm organizing the data screenshots, timestamps, addresses. We can show the pattern." She hesitated, glancing at Eli. "This is why they came after us, isn't it? We're just another target." Eli's eyes darkened. Sullivan picked the wrong target. Across town, Officer Daniel Hayes sat in his patrol car, his stomach churning. The precinct buzzed with Sullivan's version of events. Eli Harper, a dangerous ex-soldier, had ambushed them during a routine stop. The edited body cam footage, conveniently blurry at key moments, played on every news channel. "Manhunt underway for armed black suspect." The headlines screamed, painting Eli as a terrorist. Daniel, only 6 months on the force, had seen the truth. Sullivan's racial slurs, his unprovoked aggression, the way he'd targeted Eli's truck with no cause. "You people!" Sullivan had sneered, a phrase Daniel had heard too often in the tactical unit. He opened his phone, scrolling through photos he'd secretly taken, doctored reports. Cash envelopes, changing hands, Sullivan bragging about cleaning up Ashwood for developers. Daniel's hands shook. Speaking up could end his career, or worse. But staying silent was eating him alive. He remembered Eli's eyes in that moment, calm, controlled, not the monster Sullivan described. Daniel started recording audio on his phone, capturing Sullivan's next boast about teaching these people a lesson. Back in the church basement, Malcolm pulled up an email chain linking Sullivan to City View's CEO. They're not just after houses, he said. They're clearing entire blocks using police power to scare folks into selling cheap. Talia's eyes widened. This is bigger than us. We need to go public. She created folders on her laptop, organizing evidence with a clarity that impressed Malcolm. Court-proof, she said. Every file backed up to a secure cloud. Eli paced, his mind racing. Going public paints a target on our backs. The system protects its own. Then we make it impossible to ignore. Talia said, her voice fierce. My video these files. We show the world who Sullivan really is. Reverend Tate nodded. The Lord works through truth, Brother Eli. But you'll need a plan. They're mobilizing everything, SWAT, feds, even unmarked units. Eli stopped, his gaze distant. They're not just after me. They're scared of what we know. He looked at Talia, pride mixing with fear. She wasn't the scared kid from the truck anymore. She was fighting just like he'd taught her. Malcolm's screens flickered with live feeds of police movements. They're calling you a domestic terrorist, Eli. Sullivan's pushing hard to justify the manhunt. Says you're tied to extremist groups. Extremist, Talia scoffed, pulling up a redacted military file on Eli. You're a hero. Sudan embassy crisis, Yemen cell takedown. Why hide this? Because heroes don't always come home whole. Eli said, his voice rough. I was a weapon, Talia. Sometimes the lines between right and wrong blurred. He rubbed his wrist, the bruise a reminder of how close he'd come to losing control. Malcolm interrupted. We've got a city council meeting next week. Mayor's pushing a redevelopment plan, city views involved. Sullivan's unit handles security. It's our shot to expose them. Talia's fingers flew across her keyboard. I'm building a presentation, data, videos, stories from families they've hurt. We go live stream it everywhere. Dangerous, Eli warned. They'll do anything to stop us. Then we do it together, Talia said, meeting his eyes. You taught me to stand up to bullies, Uncle Eli. This is what that looks like. Eli felt the weight of her words. He'd wanted to shield her from his world, but Sullivan had brought it to their door. The church basement felt smaller now, the walls closing in as sirens grew louder outside. Sullivan's hunt was intensifying, fueled by greed, and a hatred Eli knew too well. But Ashwood wasn't just a target, it was a community ready to fight back. And Eli, whether he wanted to or not, was its warrior. Officer James Sullivan's voice echoed through the precinct, a venomous growl that silenced the usual chatter. Harper's a dead man walking, he spat, limping on his bandaged thigh as he briefed the tactical team. His eyes, bloodshot with rage, burned with the humiliation of being disarmed by Elijah Eli Harper in front of his own rookie Daniel Hayes. The edited body cam footage, carefully doctored to paint Eli as a crazed assailant, played on a loop across Baltimore's news channels, branding him a domestic terrorist. Sullivan's real motive, though, wasn't justice. It was survival. Eli and his niece Talia had evidence that could unravel his lucrative deal with City View Development Group, a scheme built on forcing black families out of Ashwood for profit. Sullivan's slurs, calling Eli boy, and worse, revealed a deeper hatred, one that saw the neighborhood as a blight to be erased. He wouldn't let a gardener and a teenager burn his empire down. Drop a comment with where you're from to join this fight for truth. And don't miss what's coming, subscribe, because tomorrow's chapter will hit harder. In the dim basement of Reverend Marcus Tate's church, Eli stood by the small window watching unmarked SUVs roll through Ashwood streets. The air was thick with tension, the hum of police radios crackling through Malcolm Reed's hacked feeds. Talia sat at a folding table, her laptop open, compiling their evidence-encrypted police files, Sullivan's offshore accounts, and her own video of the traffic stop, its audio crystal clear with his racial slurs. We've got enough to bury him, she said, her voice steady despite the bruise on her cheek from the day's chaos. At 16, she'd already seen too much, but her eyes burned with defiance. Malcolm, his weathered face lit by monitor glow, nodded. City council meetings in 5 days. Mayor's redevelopment pitch is the perfect stage. Sullivan's unit will be there for security. We stream everything live, unfiltered. Eli's bruised wrist ached as he flexed it, a reminder of his limits. They'll try to stop us. Sullivan's desperate. He'll hit hard. Then we hit harder, Talia said, saving another file. The truth is, our weapon. Reverend Tate descended the stairs, his face grim. Word from my contacts. Sullivan's pulling strings with the feds. They're calling this a counterterrorism op. Armored vehicles, SWAT the works. He paused, meeting Eli's eyes. They're not just after you, Brother Eli. They're using you to scare the whole neighborhood. Eli's jaw tightened. Sullivan's hatred wasn't just personal, it was systemic, a power play to crush Ashwood's spirit. We need a plan B, he said. If they shut down the stream, we're done. Already on it, Malcolm said, holding up flash drives. Redundant servers, encrypted backups, multiple broadcast channels. They cut 1-3 more go live. Talia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then froze. It's a message. From an unknown number. She opened it, revealing a grainy photo of herself walking to school. The text read, "Back off or you're next." Her hands shook, but she didn't look away. They're watching me. Eli's blood ran cold. He'd faced ambushes in war zones, but this threatening his niece ignited a rage he'd buried for years. They're trying to break us, he said, his voice low. They won't. Across town, Daniel Hayes sat in his patrol car, his conscience a live wire. He'd recorded Sullivan's latest rant, bragging about cleaning out Ashwood while counting cash from a developer's envelope. The rookie's phone held more photos of falsified reports, audio of Sullivan's slurs, names of other officers on the tape. Speaking up meant torching his career, maybe his life. But the memory of Eli's precision, his restraint in wounding rather than killing, gnawed at him. Sullivan had fired first unprovoked, and Daniel had frozen. No more. He sent an encrypted message to Malcolm, a contact he'd dug up through back channels. I have evidence. Want to help Harper? Meet me. The risk was insane, but so was staying silent. 3 days later, Daniel slipped into the church basement, his civilian clothes doing little to hide his nervous energy. Eli studied him, noting the conflict in his eyes. Why now? Eli asked, his voice steel. You stood by while Sullivan pulled the trigger. I know, Daniel admitted, his voice cracking. I froze. But I've been watching him, recording everything. He targeted your truck because you're black, because Ashwood's a gold mine for his bosses. Here, he handed over a USB drive. Unedited body cam bank records his calls with City View. Talia plugged it in her fingers, flying. This is gold, she said, pulling up Sullivan's voice. These people don't deserve this land. We're doing the city a favor. The slur-laced rant made her flinch, but she kept working, integrating Daniel's files into their presentation. Eli nodded, a grudging respect forming. You're risking everything. It's not what I signed up for, Daniel said. I wanted to protect people, not ruin them. Malcolm's screens beeped, showing police chatter spiking. They're planning a raid on Ashwood tonight, he said. Sullivan's pushing for a sweep, claiming you're hiding here. Eli's mind raced, mapping contingencies. We move now. Get to a safe house. No, Talia said, standing. We finished the presentation. The council meeting's our shot. Before Eli could argue, Malcolm's security feed flickered. A black van pulled up outside the church, its doors opening to reveal 3 men in tactical gear. They're here, Malcolm hissed, switching to external cameras. Sullivan's crew. Eli grabbed Talia's arm. Back exit now. But it was too late. The basement door splintered as flashbangs exploded, smoke filling the room. Eli shielded Talia, his training kicking in. He disarmed the first man through the door with a swift strike to the wrist, sending his baton clattering. The second lunged, catching Eli's shoulder with a glancing blow, a sharp pain that slowed him but didn't stop him. Eli flipped the man into a stack of chairs, the crash echoing. "Talia, run!" Eli shouted, but hands grabbed her from the smoke. She screamed, kicking, as two men dragged her toward the van outside. Eli lunged his bruised wrist, screaming, but a third man's stun baton grazed his ribs, sending a jolt through him. He staggered, vision blurring, as Talia's cries faded into the van's dark interior. Daniel, coughing through the smoke, tackled one of the men, buying Eli a second to recover. "Go!" Daniel yelled, wrestling the thug down. Eli sprinted outside, but the van was gone, taillights vanishing into the night. His phone buzzed a video from an unknown number. Talia zip-tied to a chair in a concrete room, her face bruised but defiant. Sullivan's voice cut through, "You want her back. Harper Riverside warehouse alone. 1 hour. Call anyone, she dies." "Don't do it!" Uncle Eli, Talia shouted before the video cut off. Coordinates followed. Eli's heart pounded, not with fear, but with a cold, focused rage. His Delta training calculated risks, a trap, limited time, multiple hostiles. But this was Talia, his only family, the reason he'd chosen peace over war. He turned to Malcolm, who'd escaped through a hidden exit. "Get me blueprints for that warehouse. Now." Malcolm nodded, already hacking into city records. Daniel, bloodied from the fight, stood beside them. "I'm in," he said. "Sullivan's gone too far." Eli checked his watch. 58 minutes. Sullivan's hatred had made this personal, a vendetta rooted in the same racism that targeted Ashwood's families. Eli had sworn off violence, but tonight the Reaper was waking up. Not for vengeance, but for justice. For Talia. For every life Sullivan's corruption had crushed. The Riverside warehouse loomed like a rusted fortress under a sky bruised with storm clouds, its cracked concrete walls swallowing the faint glow of Baltimore's streetlights. Elijah Eli Harper moved through the shadows, a ghost in tactical gear, his bruised wrist and grazed shoulder burning with each step. The weight of his old Delta Force instincts settled over him, sharpened by the image of Talia, his niece, his only family, zip-tied to a chair, her face bruised but fierce. Officer James Sullivan's video threat played in Eli's mind, "Come alone, or she dies." Sullivan's voice dripped with the same racial venom that had fueled the traffic stop, his slurs branding Talia and Eli as less than human obstacles to his corrupt empire with City View Development Group. Eli's mission was clear: save Talia, expose Sullivan, and tear down the system that let men like him prey on Ashwood's black families. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a reckoning. If you're gripped by this fight, drop a comment with where you're from. Stay with us, subscribe, because the next chapter will shake you to your core. Inside the church basement, Malcolm Reed's fingers danced across his keyboards, his military-grade setup humming with encrypted feeds. He'd looped the warehouse's security cameras, giving Eli a 20-minute window. 2 guards at the west entrance, 3 inside. Malcolm's voice crackled through Eli's earpiece. Sullivan's in the old foreman's office with Talia. "Be sharp, Reaper." Eli nodded, though Malcolm couldn't see. His boots, sound dampened from years of covert ops, made no noise on the wet pavement. The first guard, sloppy and distracted, never heard Eli approach. A swift chokehold dropped him silently, his body eased behind a crate. The second guard, checking his phone, took a tranquilizer dart to the neck, slumping without a sound. Eli's shoulder throbbed as he climbed a rusted fire escape, the pain a reminder he wasn't invincible. Inside the warehouse smelled of mildew and oil, its cavernous interior lit by dim red emergency lights. Across town, Officer Daniel Hayes stood in the precinct's break room, his heart pounding as he slipped a USB drive into a computer. The drive held everything: Sullivan's unedited body cam footage audio of his racist rants, bank records, tying him to City View's bribes. Daniel had recorded Sullivan boasting about clearing out the trash in Ashwood, his words a vile mix of greed and bigotry. After the church raid, Daniel's guilt had hardened into resolve. He sent the files to Malcolm, knowing the cost: his badge, maybe his life. But staying silent was no longer an option. Eli moved deeper into the warehouse, neutralizing 2 more guards with precise strikes, a knee to one's stomach, a nerve pinch to another's neck. His training was a blade honed but heavy with memories of missions he'd tried to forget. A voice echoed from the foreman's office above. "You're wasting time." Harper Sullivan taunted his gun trained on Talia, who sat cuffed in a metal cage. Her phone cracked, but functional lay on a table beside her laptop. "Come out, or she's done." Eli crept along the catwalk, his tranquilizer gun steady. Through the grimy office window, he saw Talia's defiant glare, her fingers subtly working the cuffs. Pride surged in Eli's chest. She was fighting even now. Sullivan paced his service weapon, glinting. "Your kind always thinks you're smarter." He sneered, his words a knife aimed at their race. "This neighborhood's worth millions, and you're in the way." Eli keyed his earpiece. "Malcolm, you got the stream ready?" "Live in 10 seconds," Malcolm replied. 3 backup servers encrypted. They can't shut it down." Eli attached a tiny body cam to his vest, its red light blinking. He took a breath, centering himself, then breached the office door with a silent pick. Sullivan spun, gun raised, but Eli was faster. He dove behind a desk as Sullivan fired bullets, splintering wood. "You're out of your league, boy!" Sullivan roared, the slur cutting through the gunfire. Eli hurled a metal chair, forcing Sullivan to dodge. In that split second, he closed the distance, grabbing Sullivan's wrist and twisting. The gun clattered free, but Sullivan fought dirty, slamming a fist into Eli's grazed shoulder. Pain flared, slowing Eli's reaction as Sullivan drew a stun baton, its crackle grazing his ribs. Eli grunted, vision blurring, but his training held. He swept Sullivan's legs, sending him crashing to the floor. The officer's knee, still bandaged from their last encounter, buckled with a sickening pop. Talia, free from her cuffs, grabbed her phone and hit record. "We're live!" she shouted, streaming to Malcolm's servers. Eli pinned Sullivan, his forearm pressing the officer's throat. "Talk," Eli growled. "Every bribe, every raid, every family you destroyed. The world's watching." Sullivan's face paled as he saw the blinking body cam. "You think this changes anything?" He spat, blood trickling from his lip. "The system's mine." "You're nothing." "Wrong," Eli said, tightening his grip. "Say it. Now." Sullivan's defiance crumbled under the weight of the live feed. His voice, hoarse and broken, spilled the truth: the payoffs from City View, the targeted raids on black families, the evictions to clear Ashwood for profit. "They didn't belong here," he muttered, his bigotry laid bare. "We were cleaning it up." Talia's phone captured every word, the stream reaching news outlets, social media, and activist networks. Malcolm's redundant systems thwarted police attempts to cut the feed, his screens showing thousands of viewers tuning in. Outside, Ashwood's residents gathered, phones lighting up with the broadcast. Mrs. Clara Thompson stood on her porch, tears in her eyes, as Sullivan's confession exposed the pain her community had endured. Daniel, still at the precinct, watched the stream go viral. His evidence now public triggered calls from journalists and federal agents. He slipped out, knowing internal affairs would come for him. But he'd chosen his side. Eli released Sullivan, who slumped defeated. Talia ran to her uncle, hugging him tightly. "You did it," she whispered, her voice shaking but proud. "We did it." Eli corrected his shoulder, screaming as he held her. The warehouse was quiet now, but sirens wailed in the distance. Malcolm's voice crackled through. "Feds are moving in, Eli. Sullivan's done, but you need to move." Eli guided Talia out using a back exit Malcolm had cleared. The storm outside broke rain, washing over them as they slipped into the night. By morning, the city council meeting was chaos. Protesters filled the plaza, chanting for justice, their signs reading "Ashwood stands and truth won't be buried." Reverend Tate stood among them, his voice booming through a megaphone. "This is our home, and we're taking it back." Inside, council members scrambled as Sullivan's confession played on every screen. Independent journalists, tipped off by Malcolm, demanded answers. Federal investigators, spurred by Daniel's files and public pressure, launched probes into City View and the police department. Sullivan was arrested, his racist rants now evidence in a growing case. Eli and Talia watched from Malcolm's safe house, a nondescript ranch home shielded by signal jammers. The victory was bittersweet. Ashwood had won a battle, but the war against systemic racism loomed large. Talia saved their files to a secure cloud, her hands steady. "This isn't over," she said. "We keep fighting." Eli nodded, his gaze distant. He'd wanted peace, but Sullivan's hatred had forced his hand. The Reaper had returned not for blood, but for justice. And Ashwood, battered but unbroken, was rising with him. 6 months after Officer James Sullivan's confession lit up Baltimore's screens, Ashwood's streets pulsed with a new energy, a quiet defiance born from pain and purpose. The spring sun warmed the expanded garden behind Elijah Eli Harper's modest home, where rows of kale squash and tomatoes stretched further than ever before. Eli knelt in the soil, his bruised wrist long healed, but his grazed shoulder still stiff on rainy days, a reminder of the night he'd stormed a warehouse to save his niece, Talia. Sullivan's arrest had unraveled his corrupt network with City View Development Group, exposing a scheme that used police power to displace black families for profit. His racist rants, captured live, had fueled protests and federal probes, but the real victory was here in Ashwood's rebirth. Eli, once a Delta Force operator known as Reaper, now planted seeds of hope, choosing community over combat. If you've followed this journey, drop a comment with where you're from. Subscribe, because what's next will inspire you to stand taller. The church basement, once a refuge for Eli and Talia, was now a bustling community hub. Folding chairs packed every corner, filled with neighbors learning from Malcolm Reed's cybersecurity workshop. "Your phone's a shield," Malcolm said, his weathered face lit by a projector showing encryption basics. "Use it to protect your truth." The former military hacker had become Ashwood's tech guardian, his safe house, now a training center for digital resistance. Talia, at 17, sat up front, her laptop open, guiding a group of teens through secure file sharing. The bruise on her cheek from Sullivan's attack was gone, but her resolve burned brighter. She'd turned trauma into leadership, running a youth media collective that taught kids to document police encounters safely. Eli leaned against the back wall, watching silently. He'd turned down private security gigs and a Pentagon offer to rejoin Special Ops. His garden, his niece, his neighbors, these were his mission now. The basement walls, once bare, now displayed photos of Ashwood's victories, protests that forced City View's CEO to resign, legal clinics that reclaimed seized properties, gardens sprouting in every yard. Reverend Marcus Tate moved through the crowd, offering coffee and quiet encouragement, his church, a beacon for change. Daniel Hayes slipped in through a side door, his civilian clothes still an awkward fit after losing his badge. Testifying against Sullivan had cost him his job, but Ashwood had embraced him. He now led workshops on citizen rights, turning his police training into a tool for empowerment. "Feels good to be here," he said, sitting beside Eli. "Never thought I'd be on this side of the line. Good strange or bad strange?" Eli asked, his deep voice, warm but probing. "Good," Daniel said, watching Talia teach a grandmother to lock her phone. "I'm finally protecting people, not hurting them." His evidence recordings of Sullivan's slurs, doctored reports, bribe-filled envelopes had tipped the scales, sparking investigations that dismantled the tactical unit's corruption. Malcolm joined them, wiping sweat from his brow. "3 more neighborhoods want our workshops," he said. Words spreading fast. "Let it spread," Eli replied, his gaze on the crowd. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now planned together, sharing stories of raids and resilience. Outside the church parking lot buzzed with preparations for an afternoon rally. Hand-painted signs leaned against cars. "Ashwood rises, truth is our power." Families set up chairs, kids played, and adults discussed mutual aid networks. The air hummed with purpose, a stark contrast to the fear Sullivan's raids had sown. Talia bounded over her laptop, tucked under her arm. "Rallies ready to stream," she said, her voice confident. "We're showing the world what community looks like." Her youth collective had grown training teams across Baltimore to use tech for justice. Eli squeezed her shoulder, pride mixing with the lingering fear of how close he'd come to losing her. She'd transformed her pain into a movement, a legacy he hadn't dared imagine. Reverend Tate took the microphone outside his voice, carrying over the growing crowd. "We're here not just to remember the fight, but to celebrate what we're building. This is justice. This is Ashwood." Cheers rose, fists raised as phones broadcast the rally live. Daniel helped set up cameras, teaching volunteers to monitor police presence, a skill born from his old life, now serving a new one. Eli stepped into the sunlight, the warmth easing his shoulders' ache. His garden waited tomatoes ready for harvest. But this moment, watching his community stand tall, felt like a harvest of its own. Malcolm stood beside him, his usual gruffness softened. "This is different from our old fights, Reaper. Slower, deeper." Eli nodded, seeing neighbors share food, kids laugh, and elders speak with newfound fire. "It's not just resistance," he said. "It's rebirth." Talia's voice cut through the speakers, testing the sound. "Check 1, 2. Can you hear me?" The crowd roared, a wave of unity washing over Eli. He'd fought for countries and causes, but this fight for Ashwood, for Talia, for truth, was his truest mission. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. Eli hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Harper." A woman's voice, urgent but steady. "This is Detroit. We're facing something like you did cops developers targeting our homes. We need your help." Eli looked at Talia, now leading a chant, her purple backpack bright against the crowd. A year ago, he'd wanted only to hide in his garden, to bury the Reaper forever. But peace wasn't just silence. It was empowering others to stand. "Tell me more," he said, his voice calm but certain. The garden could wait. There was more growing to do. As the rally swelled, Eli saw Ashwood's strength, families, young and old, united against the racism that had tried to break them. Sullivan was gone, his empire in ruins, but the system he'd served still loomed. Eli, Talia, Daniel, Malcolm, and their neighbors weren't just fighting back. They were building something new. One truth, one garden, one voice at a time. When a self-appointed security officer blocks a black woman's car in her parents' driveway, he thinks she's just another trespasser, easy to interrogate, easy to intimidate, easy to remove. What he doesn't know is that Naomi Parker has spent her career dismantling armed men who thought exactly the same thing. He shines a spotlight in her eyes. She warns him. He smirks. Seconds later, the neighborhood is watching a scene they'll never forget, and the real fight is only beginning. Now, before we dive in, let me know where in the world you're reading from, and if you're ready for more stories like this, don't forget to follow along, because tomorrow's story is one you will not want to miss. The sun had just slipped below the horizon when Naomi's sedan rolled onto Brookhaven Drive in Plano, Texas. It was the kind of street where kids still pedaled bikes in circles, where neighbors waved while watering lawns. Familiar. Safe. At least it used to feel that way. Her parents had been after her for weeks. Come home for dinner. Naomi, you work too hard. Tonight, she'd finally carved out space. Lasagna waited on the table. She parked in the familiar driveway engine, humming to Silent's hand, already reaching for her overnight bag. That's when the dark gray SUV appeared. Too close, too fast. Its headlights poured into her rearview mirror like floodlights, swallowing the comfort of home in a wash of white. Then came the mounted spotlight, brighter still, pinning her in place like a suspect on stage. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out mid-40s, pale, stocky, with the deliberate swagger of someone who confused presence with power. His black polo read Sentinel Shield Services, his belt heavy with gear. Legal in Texas. Yes, commissioned private security had the right to carry. But Naomi had seen that look too many times, a man who wore the holster less as a tool and more as an ego. Evening, he said, his voice flat as steel. "What's your business here?" Naomi didn't flinch. She raised her voice just enough to be heard over the glare. "This is my parents' home. I'm visiting." He stepped closer, hand hovering near his holster. Red body cam light, blinking. "Name?" Naomi tilted her head. "Who are you, Derek Whitlock?" "HOA Security," he replied, as if the title alone should settle the matter. "We've had break-ins. You match a description." She almost laughed. She knew that phrase too well. A description. Always vague, always elastic, always fitting whoever they wanted it to fit. Tonight, it fit her. The porch light snapped on. Her mother, Evelyn, stepped outside, confusion written across her face. "Naomi? What's happening? HOA Security? Thinks I don't belong," Naomi said evenly. Her father, Leon, followed, moving fast down the steps. "That's our daughter," he barked. "She grew up here." Whitlock didn't blink. His focus stayed locked on Naomi's spotlight, still cutting across her face. "Ma'am, I'll need to verify." "What exactly do you need to verify?" Naomi asked, her voice low, calm, but firm. "You've been told I live here. Twice. By the people who own this property. You don't get to escalate this because I don't look like you expected." His jaw flexed. "Step out of the vehicle." Naomi kept still. She catalogued the scene the way she had on dozens of tactical entries, angles, distances, holster type, which hand was dominant, who else had line of sight. She didn't need to reveal who she was. Not yet. 2 houses down, a door creaked open. Gabe Turner, longtime neighbor, stepped out with folded arms. "Derek, that's Leon and Evelyn's kid. Knock it off." Whitlock's eyes flicked toward him, then back to Naomi. "Sir, I have a job to do, and I have a neighborhood to live in." Gabe shot back. "And you're out of line." Evelyn moved off the porch, anger cutting through her voice. "Derek, I've lived here 22 years. No one else's guests get treated this way. Turn off the damn light." "Ma'am, I can't compromise officer safety," Whitlock replied. Naomi almost smiled. "You're not an officer, and no one here is a threat." The words landed. For the first time, he hesitated. He didn't back away, but the shift in weight was clear. His ego was screaming to press forward, but the truth was hanging heavy in the warm Texas air. He'd picked the wrong driveway. And Naomi knew this was just round 1. 15 minutes after he drove away, the neighborhood started to exhale. Porch lights clicked off one by one, conversations drifted back inside, and for a moment it felt like things might settle. Naomi stayed in the kitchen with her parents, sipping coffee. She wasn't tasting, phone still open to the non-emergency line she'd just called. She logged everything, time, place, names. That was her training document, now fight later. Then the low rumble of tires broke the calm. Headlights cut across the street again, sharper this time, slower, deliberate. The same dark gray SUV swung wide, then stopped diagonally across the street and driveway, blocking both Naomi's car and the road itself. He wasn't done. Not even close. Unbelievable, Leon muttered, stepping toward the window. He's back. Naomi stood, voice flat. Of course he is. People like Whitlock don't leave. They escalate. The SUV door opened. Derek Whitlock stepped out, clipboard in one hand, the spotlight beam sweeping again across the driveway like he owned the block. Need to finish my report, he said flatly, as if that explained everything. Naomi stepped onto the porch, Evelyn right behind her. You could have finished it from anywhere else, Naomi said. Name, date of birth, current address. Whitlock rattled off like a grocery list, ignoring her words. Naomi folded her arms. You already know who I am. You've been told. By 3 people. And you don't have the authority to demand anything more. Whitlock's eyes narrowed. Refusing to comply is suspicious in itself. The words were thin, brittle, but they carried the arrogance of someone who'd repeated them 100 times before. From across the street, Gabe Turner reappeared, phone in hand, his voice slicing the night. Derek, this is harassment. You're pushing it. Whitlock didn't even glance at him. I told you to stay out of this, Gabe. Evelyn stepped forward, voice shaking with fury. I've paid HOA dues for 22 years. Not once have you pulled this on any other guest. You've decided my daughter is the problem because she doesn't look like you expect a resident to look. Whitlock's tone turned condescending. If you have a problem with policy, ma'am, take it to the board. I'm enforcing the rules. Naomi's patience thinned. Which rule? Show me the line in your handbook that says you can block a driveway, demand ID, and shine spotlights in a resident's face. You can't. Because it doesn't exist. Whitlock didn't answer. Instead, his free hand dropped low, resting fully on the grip of his sidearm. Gasps rippled through the air. Evelyn froze mid-step. Leon surged forward, but Naomi's hand came up like a stop sign. Stay back. Her voice changed lower, steadier, the cadence of command. You touch that weapon, Derek, and you're crossing into territory you are not trained to handle. Whitlock smirked, a mask stretched too tight. So, you think you're in charge here? No, Naomi said, calm as stone. I know the law is. Porch lights blinked on up and down the block. A woman in a bathrobe stepped outside, arms folded, whispering, What's going on out here? Gabe answered loud enough for everyone. Brent's playing cowboy again. Naomi didn't move. Her hands kept her palms visible, fingers loose. Every nerve was tracking Whitlock, the angle of his stance, the twitch in his jaw, the way his thumb grazed the holster strap like a trigger he couldn't quite pull. He wasn't steady. He was rattled, and rattled men with weapons were dangerous. You've been told 3 times who I am, Naomi said, voice even. Step back. You're not in danger. You're manufacturing one. Whitlock's laugh was short, hollow. What are you then, some kind of cop? Naomi didn't answer. Silence was a weapon, too. Gabe's voice cut in, police are on their way. Derek. I called them. That landed. Whitlock's eyes darted toward the street, then back at Naomi. The calculation was clear, fight or retreat, but his pride screamed louder than reason. I'm not going anywhere, he said, finally planting his feet. We'll settle this right here. The words had barely left his mouth when he stepped forward. Fast, jerky, his hand dropping toward the holster strap. Evelyn gasped. Leon shouted. Gabe lifted his phone higher. Naomi's voice cut the night. "Stop. Right now." He didn't. He took one more step. Thumb brushed the strap. That was enough. Naomi moved. One fluid step, left hand snapping onto his wrist, right hand slamming down over the holster. Twist pivot lock, the kind of motion that was muscle memory, practiced 1,000 times in rooms far hotter than this driveway. Whitlock stumbled, elbow-trapped arm twisted across her torso. His clipboard clattered to the pavement. "Gun hands mine," Naomi said, voice low, but sharp enough for every ear around. Whitlock grunted, struggling, but the lock was clean. His options narrowed to two: give up or snap a bone. The neighborhood had gone silent, porch lights burning like spotlights, phones raised, eyes wide. And just as sirens began to echo faint in the distance, everyone knew this wasn't just a squabble in a cul-de-sac anymore. This was a reckoning. The sirens were still blocks away when Derek Whitlock realized he had lost control. His wrist locked in Naomi's grip, his holstered gun neutralized his clipboard sprawled on the pavement, and half the neighborhood staring, phones raised, eyes wide, silence thick as tar. "Step back," Naomi ordered, voice steady, the barrel of the weapon now pointed harmlessly toward the ground, but her stance saying everything. "You assaulted me!" Whitlock spat, his face, red breath heavy. "No," she corrected. "I stopped you from drawing on an unarmed woman in her own driveway. That's called self-defense." Gabe Turner stepped closer, phone up, recording without a shake. "Got it all on video, Derek. Every second." That did it. Whitlock's eyes darted toward Gabe, then back to Naomi, but before he could snarl another word, red and blue lights painted the cul-de-sac. Tires crunched to a stop behind his SUV. Two Plano patrol cars, engines idling, hard doors popping open. Two officers stepped out, hands hovering near their weapons, but not drawn. The lead officer, Ramirez, scanned the scene with quick, sharp eyes. "Everyone freeze," he called. Naomi reacted instantly. She eased the gun to the ground, slid it away with her foot, and raised both hands, palms open. Weapon safe. Magazine intact. Safety on. Her voice carried authority, clipped and professional. Ramirez's partner retrieved the pistol, checked the chamber, and holstered it in an evidence bag. Ramirez looked at Whitlock first. "You're not law enforcement. You're private security. Why was your firearm almost out of the holster on a residential street?" Whitlock tried for composure, but his voice cracked. Suspicious individual refused to comply. Officer safety demanded escalation. Officer safety, Ramirez's brow furrowed. "You're not an officer. And the individual you're calling suspicious was on her parents' property. Verified by multiple witnesses." "Misunderstanding," Whitlock blurted, eyes darting at the crowd. "Just a misunderstanding. Doesn't look that way from here," Ramirez replied. Evelyn found her voice. "That man pointed a light at my daughter, blocked her car, and tried to pull a gun in our driveway." Leon's voice followed, deep and hard. "And he's been strutting around here for months, like he owns the place." Neighbors murmured agreement, phones still up recording. A woman whispered, "Finally, someone caught him," and another man added, "He's done for." "All right, one at a time," Ramirez said, lifting a hand. "We'll need statements from everyone." Naomi stepped forward slowly, hands still open. She disarmed him clean, Gabe added quickly, nodding toward Naomi. "Didn't hurt him, just stopped him. Perfect control. I've got the whole thing on video." Ramirez's pen paused mid-word. His gaze shifted to Naomi. "You move like someone with training." Naomi gave a small nod. "I've had training. That's all I'll say right now. But you can add this." He attempted to draw on me without cause, and I neutralized the threat without injury. The officer studied her for a moment longer, then scribbled something. All right, we'll file this as an armed threat involving a licensed private contractor. HOA security or not, he can't operate outside the law. Whitlock scoffed, chest-heaving. This is all twisted. You don't know the context. Naomi met his glare without blinking. The context is a driveway, a spotlight, and an armed man who didn't know when to stop. Ramirez gestured toward the SUV. Mr. Whitlock, stay by your vehicle while we process statements. He obeyed, but his jaw was tight, pride boiling hotter than fear. He'd been humiliated. He'd been stopped. And the neighborhood had seen it. As neighbors lined up to give statements, Naomi stayed at the edge of the driveway scanning faces. Some she recognized from childhood visits, others strangers. But every one of them looked shaken and relieved. A woman in a denim jacket stepped forward quietly. Naomi, I'm Laura Green. I live 2 streets over. He hassled a delivery driver last month, made him unload everything on the sidewalk before he could leave. Same attitude. Naomi's eyes narrowed. Did you report it? Laura shook her head. Didn't think it'd matter. HOA just buries complaints. Naomi filed it away. Patterns mattered. Retaliation mattered. If Whitlock had a history, this wasn't just about her anymore, it was about everyone. By the time the officers finished, the street was alive with whispers. Kids peeking out from behind their parents' phones, still recording neighbors trading looks that said the same thing we've been waiting for this moment. Ramirez handed Naomi a case number. If you feel unsafe, we can increase patrols. Leon put a hand on his daughter's shoulder. She is the patrol we need. That drew a ripple of nervous laughter, but Naomi didn't smile. She kept her eyes on Whitlock, still standing stiff by his SUV spotlight, casting long, angry shadows. This isn't over, he hissed across the street. Naomi's voice carried calm and even. No, it isn't. But now, for the first time, the neighborhood understood they weren't just witnesses. They were part of the fight. And the HOA's dirty secrets were about to crawl into the light. The next morning, the neighborhood looked the same on the surface, neatly cut lawns, mailboxes lined like soldiers' sprinklers, ticking in the early light. But inside the Parker kitchen, the air felt heavier. Leon came in from the porch with a plain white envelope in his hand, no return address. He dropped it on the table like it was toxic. HOA notice, he muttered. Naomi slid it open with her thumb. The bold red stamp at the top shouted, Urgent Violation Notice. She skimmed the list, jaw tightening improperly. Stored trash bins, exterior light fixture, out of compliance, unauthorized vehicle in driveway. She set it down slowly. That last one's me. Evelyn's eyes flashed. They filed a violation because you parked in our driveway. Naomi nodded. Classic retaliation. He embarrassed himself, and the board is circling wagons. By mid-morning, her phone buzzed. Laura Green's voice came sharp through the line. You're not gonna believe this. I just got a violation too. Something about my flower bed not being regulation. I've had the same tulips for 8 years. They're sending a message, Naomi said flatly. To us, to anyone thinking of speaking up. They called an emergency board meeting tonight, Laura added. Closed session. Perfect, Naomi replied. That means they're nervous. Around noon, word spread. 3 more neighbors texted Naomi sudden violation letters, each more ridiculous than the last trash cans, paint shades, lawn edges too long. All dated that morning. All signed by the board. By 3 o'clock, Naomi decided it was time to go on offense. She dialed the HOA's main line, was routed to Janice Roberts, the board president. This is Janice, the voice answered, clipped and impatient. Janice, this is Naomi Parker. I'm Leon and Evelyn's daughter. A pause. Yes. I heard there was an incident last night. That's one way to put it, Naomi said. Your contracted guard blocked me in my parents' driveway, tried to pull his weapon, and had to be disarmed. There's video. Police have the report. I'd like to know what steps you're taking. Janice's tone hardened. Our security team operates under guidelines set by the board. If there was a misunderstanding, it can be resolved without making it bigger than it needs to be. Naomi let the silence hang before answering. It's already bigger than you want it to be. The officers logged it. The neighbors recorded it. And now I'm aware of at least half a dozen residents with similar encounters. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a pattern. That's a strong accusation, Janice said, though her voice wavered just enough to betray the crack. It's not an accusation. It's evidence, Naomi replied. And if your board thinks issuing retaliatory violations will scare people into silence, you might want to reconsider. Retaliation is its own legal violation, and it never ends the way you think it will. For a long second, only the hum of the line. Then we'll be in touch. Click. Evelyn, listening from across the table, shook her head. She's rattled. Good, Naomi said. Rattled people make mistakes. That evening, word spread fast. Board members arriving at the neighborhood clubhouse, arms full of binders and laptops, faces tight. Naomi pulled on a jacket. Leon raised an eyebrow. Planning to storm the castle. Not yet, Naomi said. I just want them to see me. Sometimes the best leverage is proximity. The three of them walked down the sidewalk, sunset, bleeding orange across the roofs. At the clubhouse, the long window glowed bright. Inside, the board clustered around the table, voices raised, hands chopping the air. Words leaked through the glass lawsuit. Liability. Contract review. Out front, Derek Whitlock stood with arms crossed, scanning the street. When he saw Naomi approaching, his jaw tightened. She didn't break stride, just met his stare long enough to let him know she wasn't hiding. Inside, Janice Roberts caught sight of her through the window and froze mid-sentence. She leaned toward the man beside her, whispering fast. His eyes flicked toward Naomi, then snapped back to his notes. Naomi and her parents walked slowly past, close enough to let the tension build, close enough that every board member could feel the weight of her presence outside their meeting. They're already panicking, Evelyn whispered, almost smiling. Maybe, Naomi murmured, or maybe they're deciding who to throw under the bus first. They looped back home. The phone was ringing when they stepped inside. Another neighbor, another violation letter, another story of Whitlock hassling kids, delivery drivers visiting grandparents. The dominoes were starting to fall. Naomi set her phone down, eyes sharp, voice low. This isn't just about a guard anymore. It's about who kept him here, who gave him cover, and why. And she knew the real war with the HOA hadn't even begun. By the end of the week, the neighborhood was buzzing with the kind of nervous energy people usually reserved for storm warnings. Lights stayed on later, porch conversations ran long, and the phrase, "Did you hear about Whitlock?" passed from lawn to lawn like a rumor everyone wanted confirmed. Naomi decided waiting wasn't an option. She called Laura Green. Spread the word, she said. My parents' house tonight, 7 o'clock. Anyone who's been hassled, fined, or threatened, bring them. No reporters. Just us. By sundown, folding chairs were squeezed into every corner of the Parker living room. The hallway was packed, the kitchen table stacked with coffee mugs and a tray of Evelyn's cookies. Naomi stood near the mantel, legal pad in hand, watching faces settle into nervous anticipation. Some were familiar neighbors from childhood. Others she barely recognized. But they all shared something in common. Each had a story. Laura started. 2 months ago, my son Marcus was walking home from basketball practice. Whitlock stopped him, said he matched a description. made him dump his whole gym bag on the sidewalk. When I complained, the board brushed me off. A week later, I got a violation letter about my trash cans. Retaliation. Heads nodded around the room. A middle-aged man raised his hand. I'm Greg. I do HVAC. Last fall, I came here to service a unit. Whitlock forced me to show my license just to unload equipment. Said contractors had been suspicious lately. Never saw that nonsense in 20 years of work. An elderly woman's voice trembled as she spoke. I was visiting my grandkids on Elm Street. He followed me from my car to the porch, asking who I was, why I was there. I told him to speak to my daughter. He said she could explain it at a board meeting. The room murmured in outrage. Naomi wrote each story down page after page. Dates, times, names, details, patterns forming. Always the same script matched a description appeared suspicious, refused to comply. Always vague, always aimed at the same kinds of people, black residents, Latino contractors, delivery drivers, visitors who didn't fit. When the last person finished, Naomi set down her pen and looked around the room. This, she said, holding up the notepad, is a record. And records matter. This is enough to put pressure on the board from every angle, legal, financial, public. But it only works if we stand together. A murmur rippled low but firm. They've been counting on us to feel isolated, Naomi continued. They've been counting on fear to keep us quiet. That ends tonight. We don't just respond to their violations. We file our own. With the city. With law enforcement. With anyone who'll listen. From the back, a voice called, "What about retaliation? You know they'll try." Naomi nodded. They might. But here's the difference now. Every letter, every phone call, every so-called inspection gets documented. And copies go straight to the city attorney's office. If they retaliate, they make our case stronger. Laura stood, voice strong. I've got a list started who's willing to testify if this goes to court. Hands went up around the room one after another, until nearly every person was counted. Naomi scanned the crowd. What had walked in as weariness was shifting now into resolve. Neighbors leaned together, swapping numbers, comparing notes. A single mom and a retired couple planned to share an attorney. Two dads talked about pooling resources to hire a reporter if the board stonewalled. Evelyn slipped Naomi a mug of coffee, whispering, "Look what you started." Naomi shook her head. "Look what they started. I'm just not letting them hide it anymore." The meeting went long. By the time the last neighbor left porch, lights glowed up and down the block, clusters of people still talking, exchanging numbers, whispering strategies. The neighborhood, for the first time in years, felt like a community. But Naomi knew Whitlock wasn't the only problem. He was a symptom. The disease was the board behind him, the shield that let him operate unchecked. And diseases didn't disappear because people talked. They had to be cut out. As she closed the door and stacked the empty chairs, her father spoke softly behind her. "You realize you're the one leading this now, don't you?" Naomi didn't answer right away. She stared at the stack of notes in her hand. The web of complaints, the repetition of matched a description circled again and again. Finally she said, "If that's what it takes." Outside, a car idled 2 houses down, headlights dark, a silhouette behind the wheel. Watching. Naomi slipped the notepad into her bag. "Let them watch," she whispered. "We'll make sure they see everything." The war with the HOA was no longer in the shadows. It was on record, and it was just getting started. The following week, the HOA board announced a special closed meeting at the clubhouse. No agenda, no explanation, just a printed notice on mailboxes and a blast email dripping with corporate jargon. Everyone knew what it meant. They were scrambling. By 7 o'clock, the clubhouse lot was full. Board members hustled inside with briefcases, and laptops whispering sharp into phones. Out front, Derek Whitlock stood like a guard dog on a chain arms, crossed eyes scanning the street. Naomi didn't arrive alone. She walked with her parents on either side, and nearly 24 neighbors trailing behind, shoulder to shoulder, filling the sidewalk. Phones recorded. Voices whispered. Nobody was hiding anymore. Whitlock's jaw tightened when he saw her. "This is a private meeting," he barked. Naomi stopped 3 feet from him, calm and steady. "So is harassment on a private driveway, Derek?" "That didn't stop you." The neighbors murmured a low growl of agreement. Inside, through the clubhouse windows, Janice Roberts and the rest of the board stiffened when they realized half the neighborhood was gathered outside. She leaned toward another board member, eyes darting, words clipped. Panic had a look, and she wore it. The door creaked open. Janice stepped out, smile stretched too tight. "This is a board meeting. You can bring your concerns through the proper channels." Proper channels, Naomi cut, in voice sharp but controlled. "We did. We filed complaints. We sent emails. We called. And every time the board buried them. But now we have video police reports and witnesses. Those are the channels you can't bury." Applause broke out, scattered at first, then rolling through the crowd until it drowned Janice's protest. Whitlock snapped, voice booming. "This mob doesn't scare me." His hand twitched toward his belt, but this time Naomi moved first. "Don't," she said loud enough to freeze him mid-motion. "You've already been disarmed once in front of witnesses. Do you really want to replay that scene?" The crowd erupted. Laughter, shouts, cheers. Whitlock's face burned crimson. He stepped back, fists clenched, and for the first time he looked smaller. Janice tried to regain control. "This is out of order. The board will review the situation internally." "No," Naomi said. "You won't. The city attorney already has every violation letter you sent, every retaliatory fine, every report of Derek harassing delivery drivers, teenagers, grandparents. It's not internal anymore. It's civil rights. And you're liable." Gasps rippled through the board members visible behind the glass. One of them shoved his chair back, whispering urgently into a phone. Another buried his face in his hands. Laura Green stepped forward from the crowd, voice strong. "We're done being afraid. If you don't remove Whitlock and end these abuses, we'll remove you. Every single one of you." Dozens of neighbors shouted agreement. Some raised their violation letters high like protest signs. Phones angled for the perfect shot. Janice's mask cracked. "We'll review contracts immediately," she stammered. "You'll do more than that," Naomi replied. "You'll issue written notice to every resident clearing bogus violations. You'll release records of complaints filed and how they were handled. And you'll make it public, because if you don't, we will." The crowd roared chants of "public, public, public," echoing off the clubhouse walls. Whitlock lunged forward, voice raw. "You think you've won. You don't know who you're messing with." Naomi didn't flinch. She stepped closer, lowering her voice until only he could hear. "I've been in rooms hotter than this facing men with more power and less sense. They thought the same thing you do. And they all ended the same way, stripped of authority, exposed for what they were. You're next." For the first time, he looked away. Police cruisers rolled up, then summoned by someone inside the boardroom, lights flashing. But this time, they didn't approach Naomi. They went straight to Janice and Whitlock, speaking low, taking notes. Phones captured every second. By the end of the night, Whitlock was escorted off the property. The board, pale and shaken, promised immediate review of contracts and policies. It wasn't justice yet, but it was the crack in the wall Naomi had been waiting for. Later on, her parents' porch, Naomi sat with a mug of coffee cooling in her hands. Leon leaned back, exhaling long. You know you could have walked away that first night. Let the system handle it. I could have, Naomi said. But systems don't change, unless someone forces them to. Evelyn reached over, resting a hand on her daughter's. You gave people their voices back. Naomi shook her head. They already had them. They just needed to be reminded they could use them. Down the street, kids rode bikes again. A neighbor waved. Life looked the same, but Naomi knew better. Something had shifted. Because this wasn't just a fight about one man with a badge and a gun. It was about power abused in plain sight. About silence and the cost of breaking it. About neighbors realizing they weren't alone. And, as the night settled over Brookhaven Drive, one truth lingered in the warm Texas air. Change doesn't start somewhere else. It starts here. When a cautious white woman peers through her bay window, she doesn't see a tired father walking home after a long shift. She doesn't see a plainclothes detective who has spent 13 years serving his city. She sees something else entirely, an armed stranger who doesn't belong. Her hands tremble as she dials 911, convinced danger is only steps away. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights slice through a quiet suburban street, neighbors pour onto porches, and the man at the center of it all suddenly feels like a suspect in his own driveway. What she doesn't realize is that the man she just reported is not a criminal. He is Detective Marcus Reed, one of Overland Park's own. And the fallout from her call is about to shake an entire neighborhood to its core. The cul-de-sac on Silver Birch Court had always been a stage for small dramas, arguments over holiday decorations, lawn care complaints, the endless tug-of-war over parking spots. But nothing had ever prepared it for the storm that began one autumn evening. From behind pristine curtains, Margaret Collins, the HOA president, clutched her phone so tightly, her knuckles whitened. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing on the man across the street. He wasn't running, shouting, or even looking around. He was simply walking toward his sleek black sedan. But Margaret's gaze locked on one detail, the holstered gun on his hip. Her heart thudded. Logic gave way to fear. 911. What's your emergency? There's a man, she hissed. He's got a gun. He looks dangerous. The dispatcher's calm voice carried through the line. Is he threatening anyone? Pointing the firearm. No, Margaret admitted, but he's armed and I don't recognize him. He doesn't belong here. Across the street, Marcus Reed slid his keys into his pocket, already imagining dinner with his wife and daughters. His Glock sat where it always did, strapped safely to his hip, part of the job, as natural to him as a seatbelt. He wasn't a stranger here. He lived here. But to Margaret, none of that mattered. Units are on the way, the dispatcher said. Margaret exhaled with relief, convinced she'd just prevented a crisis. What she never asked herself was the simplest question: what if I'm wrong? Minutes later, the peace shattered. Two cruisers turned into the cul-de-sac lights, bouncing off brick walls and manicured lawns. Sirens cut abruptly, leaving only the hum of engines and the gasps of neighbors stepping outside. Curtains shifted. Doors cracked open. Children on bicycles scattered like startled birds. Marcus froze, not because he was guilty, but because he'd been here before. He knew what those lights meant, knew the careful posture of officers approaching, with hands hovering near their weapons. Sir, one officer barked, "Hands where we can see them." Marcus raised his palms slowly. His voice carried calm authority. "I'm Detective Reed, Plainclothes Division. My badge is in my jacket pocket. I'll reach for it slowly, if that's all right." The younger officer, stiff and wary, kept his stance tight. The older one squinted, recognition dawning. "Detective Marcus Reed." "Yes, badge number 4175. Marcus lifted the wallet, high movements, deliberate, narrating each motion like he was teaching a rookie. The older officer stepped forward, inspected the badge, then nodded with relief. Confirmed. Major Crimes Division. The tension bled out of the scene, at least for the officers. They knew him. They respected him. One even gave a quick, sheepish salute. But the neighbors who'd gathered didn't hear the words exchanged. They only saw the theater of it all, flashing lights, guns close to drawn, then sudden deference. Inside her home, Margaret Collins peeled back the curtain an inch more. Confusion puckered her brow. Why were the officers saluting? Why weren't they arresting him? She muttered to herself. What on earth? Her husband Douglas stepped into the room, adjusting his glasses. "What's going on? I called the police," she said firmly. That man was carrying a gun. Douglas followed her gaze, then sighed. "That's Marcus Reed. He moved in months ago. Law enforcement. We met him at the neighborhood barbecue, remember?" Margaret flushed. She remembered the barbecue, vaguely faces' names, polite handshakes, but she hadn't made the connection. And now, with neighbors whispering and officers stepping away, she felt cornered by her own certainty. Better safe than sorry, she muttered, though the words rang hollow even to her. Marcus stood rooted in his driveway badge, tucked back inside his jacket. The official danger had passed, but the stairs had not. Curtains quivered. Porch lights flickered on. Murmurs rippled across the cul-de-sac. He lives here. He's a detective. His chest tightened. He'd faced drug busts gone wrong, stakeouts that ended in chaos, but nothing felt heavier than this, standing on his own lawn, treated as if he were an intruder. Slowly, he turned toward his front door. The porch light snapped on a spotlight he hadn't asked for. He caught Margaret's eyes through her window. Her lips parted, her face pale, a woman rehearsing excuses even as she realized the truth. The night should have ended there, but it didn't. The damage was already done. The neighbors had seen. The story had started. And the words Margaret had spoken, "He doesn't belong here," would echo long after the lights faded. He had faced down gang leaders, armed standoffs, and crime scenes most people couldn't stomach. Yet nothing felt as raw, as humiliating, as the moment Detective Marcus Reed stepped through his front door and saw the reflection of flashing lights still dancing in the living room window. His daughters had seen them too. 8-year-old Alyssa and 10-year-old Janelle peeked from the staircase, whispering with the urgency only children knew. Their eyes were wide, confused, afraid, waiting for their father to explain why squad cars had pulled up in front of their house. Marcus's wife, Danielle, handed him a plate of chicken that had gone cold. "Eat something," she said softly, as if food could blunt the weight pressing on his chest. He set it aside, untouched. "Do you know what's worse than being treated like a suspect?" he muttered. "It's having to explain to your kids why it happened." Across the street, in a kitchen lit by the bluish glow of a laptop, Margaret Collins logged into the HOA's private message board. Her hands still trembled as she typed, "I acted to protect our community." Anyone else would have done the same. Her husband Douglas stood behind her with folded arms. "You don't need to post anything," he said flatly. "The whole neighborhood saw what happened. Best thing you can do now is stay quiet." "I won't be painted as the villain," Margaret snapped, typing faster. "If something had happened and I hadn't called, everyone would blame me." Douglas sighed, his patience fraying. "Or maybe they'd thank you for remembering who your neighbor is. You shook his hand at the summer barbecue. He works law enforcement, Margaret." But she wouldn't hear it. Pride wrapped around her like armor. She hit post, convinced her version of events would stand. By morning, the HOA board had exploded with comments. Some neighbors backed her up. "You can't ignore a man walking around with a gun." Others were furious. "Marcus is a detective." Everyone saw the salute. This wasn't about safety. It was about assumptions. The subdivision's quiet lawns now hummed with digital noise, dividing the block into factions. And Marcus, sipping bitter coffee at his kitchen counter, scrolled through the thread with a heavy heart. Danielle leaned over his shoulder. "You shouldn't read that." "I don't get the luxury of ignoring it," Marcus replied. "They're talking about me, about us. And they're not talking about what really happened. They're talking about how they feel about her." That night, the silence at the dinner table was louder than words. Alyssa finally broke it with the question Marcus had dreaded. "Daddy, did you do something wrong?" The words hit harder than any bulletproof vest ever had. Marcus forced a smile, but his voice carried an ache. "No, baby. I didn't do anything wrong. Someone just thought I did." "Then why did the police come?" Janelle asked, her brow furrowed. Marcus swallowed. "Because sometimes when people are scared, they don't stop to ask questions. They call for help, even when help isn't needed. And sometimes that puts people in danger, who haven't done anything at all." The girls frowned, trying to fit the puzzle pieces together. "But the officers knew you," Alyssa said. "They said hi." "They did," Marcus admitted. "But not everyone will. And that's why you two always need to be careful no matter where you are. Some people will think they know your story before you've said a word." Danielle pulled the girls close. "That's why we stand together as a family." Meanwhile, Margaret rehearsed her defense in front of her bathroom mirror. "Better safe than sorry," she whispered again and again until the phrase sounded like gospel. Yet each time she repeated it, the conviction weakened. She could still see the salute from the officers, the relaxed conversation, the way the neighbors had looked at her house afterward. Her husband's voice echoed in her mind. "You jumped too fast." But Margaret refused to let herself feel the sting of regret. Admitting she was wrong would unravel everything she believed about herself, about being the one who kept the neighborhood safe. Back at the Reed home, Marcus sat on the edge of his daughter's beds, after tucking them in. He kissed their foreheads, promising tomorrow would be better, though he knew tomorrow might only bring more whispers, more stares. When he returned downstairs, Danielle was waiting with folded arms. "You can't just swallow this, Marcus. You can't let her pretend what she did was harmless." "I don't want to be the guy who turns every barbecue into a debate," Marcus said quietly. "I just wanted to live here like anyone else." Danielle's eyes burned with quiet fire. "You're not like anyone else to them. That's the problem. And until you make them see it, they'll keep writing their own story about you." Marcus looked at the badge on the coffee table, the metal catching a sliver of light. For years, it had been his shield. Tonight, it felt like a weight. In the Collins household, Douglas shut down his laptop and turned to his wife. "You should have walked outside and spoken to him. Instead, you dialed 3 numbers that could have changed his life forever. Maybe even ended it." Margaret's jaw tightened. "If something had happened, I'd be the one blamed." Sometimes being safe is just an excuse people use when they don't want to admit they were wrong, Douglas said. Margaret said nothing. The silence between them was thick, the kind that lingers long after the lights go out. And so one block in suburban Kansas lay split down the middle not by fences or property lines, but by a single phone call. On one side, a family quietly piecing together how to explain injustice to children. On the other, a woman clinging to the belief she had done her duty. The cruisers were gone. The lights had faded, but the echoes of Margaret's words, "He doesn't belong here," had only just begun to take root. And the next confrontation was no longer a matter of if. It was only a matter of when. In every neighborhood, there comes a moment when silence is no longer an option. On Silver Birch Court, that moment came sooner than anyone expected. Detective Marcus Reed had tried to move on. He grilled chicken waved at passing cars and forced smiles at the neighbors who hesitated too long before waving back. But the weight of the stairs never left him. The sidewalk felt narrower, the drive to his mailbox longer. It was as if every step he took had to be measured, deliberate, rehearsed, for an audience that had already judged him. And the loudest audience member lived right across the street. 3 days after the call, Marcus stood at the curb with his mail when his wife Danielle stepped out, folding her arms against the evening breeze. She didn't need to say it. He knew she'd been watching Margaret Collins pacing behind her curtains all afternoon. "You know she's not going to stop hiding," Danielle murmured. "Not until she's forced to face what she did." Marcus exhaled. "And if I confront her, I become the angry black man proving her point." "You're not angry," Danielle shot back. "You're human. And humans demand respect." The choice was made for them minutes later when Margaret's door creaked open. She hesitated on her porch, husband Douglas trailing reluctantly behind her, as though pulled by invisible strings. Neighbors noticed instantly, curtains parted, conversations, hushed. A lawn mower down the block suddenly went quiet. It was the theater of suburbia, and the actors had taken their marks. Detective Reed Margaret called her voice louder than it needed to be. It carried across the cul-de-sac shaky, but determined the kind of voice rehearsed in front of a mirror. Marcus turned slowly, his posture calm but unreadable. "Mrs. Collins, she faltered, then squared her shoulders. "I wanted to make clear that when I called, it wasn't personal. I was acting out of caution. My responsibility as HOA president is to keep this community safe." Danielle stepped down from their porch before Marcus could answer. Her voice was sharp, cutting across the street like a blade. "Safe for who? Because it sure wasn't for my husband." A ripple moved through the watching neighbors. Helen Drummond leaned over her railing, whispering, "Here we go," to anyone close enough to hear. Margaret bristled. "I would have called no matter who it was. Man, woman, black, white. It was the gun that concerned me." "That's a lie, and you know it," Danielle snapped. "Plenty of people here carry. I've seen them. You've never once picked up the phone on them. You saw him and decided he didn't belong." Douglas shifted uncomfortably beside his wife, staring at the ground. He didn't defend her. Marcus raised a hand, steady but firm, halting the volley before it turned into an all-out shouting match. He took a few steps closer, stopping at the edge of the street so every ear could catch his words. "Mrs. Collins," he said, voice even, but edged with steel. "Do you know what it feels like to stand in your own driveway, with lights flashing, hands near weapons, your kids watching from the window, and realize it's happening not because of something you did, but because of what someone assumed about you?" Margaret's lips parted. For a second, her eyes softened, but pride returned like a reflex. "I won't apologize for being careful." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Then, at least be honest. You didn't see danger, you saw me. And you decided I didn't belong." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. Douglas cleared his throat, finally daring to speak. "Margaret, maybe it's time to listen." But Margaret folded her arms, turning on her heel. "I don't want to argue." She marched back toward her porch, face flushed, the gavel of her pride still in her grip. Marcus's voice carried after her, low but powerful, "You don't want to argue because you know you were wrong. Think about that the next time you pick up the phone." She froze, her back stiff for half a heartbeat, then disappeared inside her house. The block exhaled, but the whispers began immediately. Helen shook her head with satisfaction. She can't hide behind her title forever. Paul Richter, standing awkwardly with a rake in his hands, muttered, "This isn't good. The neighborhood's becoming a stage show." And maybe he was right. But theater or not, Everyone had seen what mattered. Marcus Reed standing his ground with dignity, while Margaret Collins retreated into shadows. Later that night, Marcus sat at his dinner table pushing food around his plate. Danielle reached across, touching his hand. "You said what needed to be said." He nodded slowly, though his chest still felt heavy. "This isn't just about her anymore. The whole neighborhood's involved now." Danielle's eyes met his, fierce and unwavering. "Then, let them be involved, because the truth is bigger than her excuses." Marcus leaned back, exhaustion etched into his face. He hadn't wanted to be a symbol. He had only wanted to be a neighbor. But symbols aren't chosen, they're forced. And now, with the neighborhood watching every move, the stage was set for something far larger than a single argument at the curb. The next act was already on the horizon, the HOA meeting. And this time, the audience wouldn't just be the neighbors on Silver Birch Court, it would be the entire community ready to choose sides. Saturday evening, the normally quiet community center on 135th Street buzzed with more tension than it had seen in years. Folding chairs scraped against linoleum, neighbors clustered into nervous cliques, and the air carried a charge that felt more like a courtroom than a homeowners association meeting. At the front of the room, Margaret Collins adjusted the gavel in her hand. She had stacked a binder full of notes in front of her, as if paperwork could shield her from what she knew was coming. Her husband Douglas sat 2 chairs down, looking like a man trapped in a storm he hadn't signed up for. On the other side of the aisle, Detective Marcus Reed walked in with his wife Danielle by his side. The room quieted, as eyes turned toward him. Some faces looked relieved, others curious, and a few cold, measuring. Marcus kept his head high, but inside his stomach tightened. He had never walked into a room where he felt more judged, more on display, than this one filled with his own neighbors. Margaret cleared her throat, tapping the gavel once. "Let's call this meeting to order. Tonight we're here to discuss the incident earlier this week and to address concerns about safety perception and trust within our community." A low murmur rolled through the crowd. Helen Drummond, perched in the second row, wasted no time raising her hand. "Let's stop dancing around it." Margaret called 911 on Detective Reed, and half this neighborhood saw officers saluting him in his driveway. "We all know what happened." Margaret stiffened, forcing her voice steady. "Yes, I placed the call. I saw an armed man I didn't recognize. My intent was to protect this neighborhood." Marcus rose to his feet, his presence commanding but calm. "An armed man you didn't recognize? I've lived here for months. We met at the barbecue in June. You asked me about crime rates on this very block." A few gasps rippled through the rows. Margaret's face flushed, but she pressed on. "I can't be expected to remember every face." Danielle shot up beside her husband, fire in her eyes. "But you remembered the gun. You remembered enough to assume danger. What you didn't remember or didn't care about was that he was your neighbor. That's not caution, Margaret. That's bias." The room erupted in whispers. Some neighbors nodded, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Brian Mullen, a father of 3 and longtime fence-sitter, raised his voice in an attempt to calm the tide. "Can we please remember this isn't about finger-pointing? Margaret thought she was protecting us. Maybe she overreacted, sure, but she wasn't trying to hurt anyone." Danielle's voice cracked like a whip. "Overreacting could have gotten my husband killed. Do you understand that if the wrong officers had shown up, if they didn't know him, if his badge came out a second too late, this wouldn't just be an HOA meeting, it would be a memorial." The words landed heavy. Silence swept through the room, broken only by the sound of someone shifting uncomfortably in the back row. Paul Richter cleared his throat. "Look, I don't want to take sides, but what happened shows something bigger than one phone call. It shows how quickly fear takes over, and who we choose to be afraid of. Marcus's gaze swept the room. He let the pause linger, let the neighbors feel the weight of the silence before speaking again. You didn't see danger because of a weapon. You saw danger because of me. Because when some people see a black man with a gun, even when he's wearing a badge, they don't see protection. They see threat. A sharp intake of breath rippled across the chairs. His words had cut to the bone. Margaret slammed the gavel, desperate to regain control. I refuse to be painted as some villain. My responsibility is safety first. Always. Marcus turned toward her, his voice low but resonant. Safety for who? It wasn't for me. It wasn't for my daughters. You didn't stop to think about the man you were calling about, or the consequences of your words. You thought about your comfort. That's not leadership. That's prejudice dressed up as responsibility. The room buzzed louder now, neighbors whispering, shifting the fragile fabric of their suburban peace, unraveling one thread at a time. Helen leaned forward, her voice sharp. Margaret, we all want safety, but you put one of our own at risk. Admit it. You jumped to conclusions. Margaret's jaw clenched. I will not apologize for being cautious. Danielle muttered just loud enough for half the room to hear. Then, maybe you shouldn't be in charge. The words landed like a bomb. Heads turned, Margaret's face drained of color. Brian Mullen quickly tried to steer the ship away from collapse. We don't need to start talking about leadership changes. Let's focus on solutions. Maybe a community-wide introduction of all residents. Better communication so people can't claim they don't know their neighbors. Marcus shook his head slowly. Policies won't fix what happened. You can write all the rules you want, but if people look at me and see danger, first words on paper won't change that. The quiet that followed wasn't ordinary silence. It was the sound of a mirror being held up to an entire community, forcing them to see themselves. Douglas finally broke it, his voice weary but honest. Margaret, maybe it's time to listen, not defend. You don't have to agree with everything said here, but you can't ignore it. Not after what happened. For a moment, Margaret's grip on the gavel loosened. Her eyes flicked to Marcus, then to Danielle, then to the rows of faces waiting for her response. But pride hardened her again. This meeting is adjourned, she snapped, slamming the gavel down. The sound echoed sharp and final. Yet no one stood. Neighbors lingered, whispering, debating their eyes, following Marcus as he placed a steady hand on Danielle's back and guided her out of the room. You said what needed to be said, Danielle whispered once they were outside, the night air cool on their faces. Marcus nodded, though his chest still ached. I didn't want to be a symbol. I just wanted to be a neighbor. Danielle squeezed his hand. Symbols don't get to choose. But the truth, you spoke it. And the truth will outlast her gavel. The HOA meeting was supposed to be the end of it, a tense, messy finale to a neighborhood squabble. But by Monday morning, it was clear the story had only just begun. Someone had leaked an audio recording. Nobody knew who, though plenty suspected Helen Drummond, with her sharp tongue and sharper phone skills. By breakfast, snippets of Marcus Reed's voice were circulating online. You didn't see danger because of a weapon. You saw danger because of me. By lunchtime, a local reporter at KMBC Channel 9 had published an article with the headline, Detective Confronted by HOA President After 911 Call Sparks Racial Tensions in Overland Park. The piece was short but biting. It quoted neighbors anonymously described the HOA meeting as charged and painted, Margaret Collins as the woman who dialed 911 on her own detective neighbor. Within hours, Facebook groups were ablaze, Twitter threads dissected every sentence, and Marcus Reed, the man who just wanted to grill dinner with his daughters, was suddenly a trending topic in Kansas City. At the precinct, Colleagues clapped him on the back. "Man, Reed, you've gone viral," one officer joked. "You're famous now." Marcus gave a tight smile. Fame wasn't what this felt like. Fame was wanted. This was exposure. This was being dissected like a specimen. His Captain Ruiz pulled him aside. "You handled the HOA meeting well. Professional. But listen, this isn't going away. The media's going to want interviews. Community groups will want statements. Be ready." "I'm not interested," Marcus said firmly. "I don't want to be a headline. I just want peace." Ruiz's expression was sympathetic but blunt. Sometimes peace isn't an option. Not when people see you as the story. Across the street, Margaret Collins was unraveling. Her phone buzzed nonstop with texts, many critical, some supportive. Online strangers she'd never met dubbed her the HOA Karen of Overland Park. Memes appeared overnight. One showed a woman clutching binoculars captioned, "Neighborhood Watch Level Paranoia." Douglas tried to console her. "Stop reading it. It's poison." "I can't," Margaret muttered, scrolling with trembling fingers. "They're twisting everything, making me look hateful." "Intent doesn't erase impact," Douglas said quietly. Her eyes burned with frustration. "So, what? I just sit here while people drag my name through the mud." "Maybe," Douglas replied, "you start by admitting you were wrong." Margaret's face hardened. "I wasn't wrong. I did what was right. The world's gone crazy if people can't see that." Meanwhile, Danielle Reed fielded calls from family across town. "We saw Marcus on the news," her sister said. "Are you guys okay?" "We're fine," Danielle answered, though. Exhaustion cracked her voice. "But it's bigger now. Strangers who don't know us are weighing in like we're some case study." That night, Marcus sat at the dinner table scrolling his phone. He replayed the clip from the HOA meeting where his voice echoed, "That's not leadership. That's prejudice dressed up as responsibility." Hearing it played back made his stomach knot. He hadn't meant for those words to go beyond the community center walls. Now they were headlines dissected on talk radio, debated on podcasts shared across state lines. Danielle touched his hand. "You realize what you said wasn't just about Margaret. It was about every person who's ever been judged before they were known. That's why people are sharing it." Marcus rubbed his temples. "I didn't want to be a symbol. I just wanted to come home." "Symbols don't get to choose," Danielle said softly. "Sometimes the world chooses for them." The next morning at a gas station, a stranger tapped Marcus's shoulder. "Hey, you're that detective from the news, right? The HOA thing?" Marcus sighed. "Yeah, that's me. For what it's worth, I think you handled it with more patience than I would have." "Respect." Marcus nodded politely, but as he drove away, the compliment tasted hollow. Respect was good, but it didn't erase the humiliation of being treated like a suspect at his own home. Back on Silver Birch Court, neighbors split into camps. Helen told anyone who'd listen, "This is what happens when people act before they think." Margaret dug a hole she can't crawl out of. Carla Jensen, more cautious, offered another perspective. "The internet doesn't know her like we do. She's getting death threats, Helen." "That's not justice either." Paul Richter frowned, uneasy. "Maybe the lesson is this: our neighborhoods become a battlefield instead of a community. Everyone's picking sides. That's not who we're supposed to be." That night, Marcus's voicemail pinged. "Detective Reed, this is Rachel Green from the Kansas City Star. We'd love to hear your side directly. Please call me back." He deleted it without responding. Danielle looked at him across the room. This isn't going away. The neighborhood meeting was just the start. The story belongs to the city now. Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. She was right. But if the city wanted a story, it was going to get the truth. And for the first time, He began to consider something he'd avoided for years, speaking publicly, not as a detective, not as a neighbor, but as a black man who had been judged before he was known. For 3 nights straight, Detective Marcus Reed lay awake replaying the same scene, the cruisers pulling into his street hands, hovering near weapons, his daughter's wide eyes pressed against the upstairs window. Each time he closed his own eyes, the memory sharpened, not blurred. It wasn't fading. It was growing. By Wednesday, he made a decision. He called the reporter back. The next morning, Marcus stood on the precinct steps, flanked by cameras and microphones. He wasn't a man who chased attention, he hated it. But now the story wasn't just his, it belonged to the city. Reporters leaned forward, ready to parse every syllable. Marcus took a breath. Yes, I was the man in the HOA call. Yes, I was carrying a firearm. I'm a detective. Carrying is part of my duty on and off the clock. But what matters here isn't whether I had a gun. What matters is what people saw when they looked at me. He let silence hang for a beat, cameras clicking like frantic insects. They didn't see a father coming home to grill dinner. They didn't see a neighbor who's lived here for months. They didn't see a detective who's risked his life for this city for 13 years. They saw danger. And in less than a minute, that assumption brought squad cars to my front yard. His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't hide it. That night, my daughters asked me if I'd done something wrong. Imagine explaining to an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old that their father was treated like a suspect in his own neighborhood. A reporter asked the inevitable, "Are you saying the HOA president acted out of racial bias?" Marcus met her gaze. "I'm saying bias doesn't always come from hate. Sometimes it comes from fear. But fear unchecked destroys trust. That's what happened on my street. And if we don't face it, it will keep happening." The clip aired that night. It wasn't fiery, it wasn't rehearsed. It was steady, raw, painfully human. It spread faster than any of them imagined. Teachers played it for classrooms, pastors quoted it in sermons, social media lit up with debates, defenses, and admissions. For the first time since the 911 call, Marcus felt something other than humiliation. He felt purpose. Across the street, Margaret Collins sat at her kitchen table laptop, open, face pale. She had expected Marcus to attack her, to name her. Instead, he never once said her name. He spoke about something larger, something deeper. "He's painting me as a bigot," she whispered. Douglas shook his head. "No, Margaret. He didn't even mention you." He held up a mirror. "Whether you like what you see, that's on you." For the first time, guilt pierced through her armor of pride. She closed the laptop, but the silence in the room was louder than the online voices she had tried to drown out. Friday evening, Marcus was in his backyard grilling chicken when Danielle poked her head out. "There's someone at the door for you." He wiped his hands, stepped inside, and froze. Margaret stood in the entryway, Douglas behind her like a reluctant witness. Her expression was tight, but not defensive. Shame flickered in her eyes, dim but real. "Detective Reed," she began, voice quieter than he'd ever heard it. "I wanted to apologize. I know it's late. I know I should have done this sooner. But I let pride get in the way. I was wrong." Marcus studied her face. The apology wasn't graceful, but it was something. He didn't let her off easy. "Do you understand what that call meant? What it could have cost me?" "My daughters." Margaret swallowed. "I do now. At the time I told myself I was protecting the neighborhood. But the truth is, I didn't see you. I saw a story in my head. And I reacted. I'm sorry." Douglas added quietly, "We've both lost sleep over it." I told her intent doesn't erase impact. Marcus let the silence stretch, making sure she felt the weight of her words. Then he said, "I don't need you to apologize for me. I need you to think twice the next time you're about to judge someone. That's all I want." Margaret nodded quickly, relief washing over her. "I will. I promise." She whispered another thank you before retreating Douglas, guiding her out like a man escorting someone fragile. When the door closed, Danielle looked at her husband. "Do you believe her?" Marcus stared at the door. "I believe she's scared of how she looks to the world. Whether she changes, that's on her. But at least our girls will know we stood up for what mattered." The following week, the HOA posted a new initiative, Neighborhood Connections. Quarterly gatherings where every resident would meet face-to-face instead of through blinds and message boards. Helen Drummond snorted and told Paul Richter Margaret's just saving face. But even she admitted it was a step in the right direction. The true moment of change came later that month at the park. Alyssa and Janelle chased each other across the grass while Marcus sat on a bench. Carla Jensen approached, hesitant. "I showed your speech to my teenage son," she said. "It made him ask questions about fear, about how we see people. Questions I didn't have answers to. But it made us talk. I just wanted you to know it mattered." Marcus smiled faintly. "That's why I spoke. If even one person thinks differently tomorrow than they did yesterday, then it matters." That night he sat on his porch with Danielle, the street quiet, the same one that had nearly betrayed him weeks before. "Maybe I didn't want this attention," he said softly. "But maybe that's the point. Sometimes you don't get to choose the lessons life gives you. You just decide what to do with them." Danielle rested her head on his shoulder. "So what are you going to do?" Marcus looked out at the block, the manicured lawns, the trimmed hedges, the windows where shadows still lingered. "Keep showing up. Keep being seen. And hope that the next time someone looks at me, they see a neighbor before anything else." The weight wasn't gone, but it was lighter now. One phone call had forced an entire community to confront what it didn't want to admit, that safety without trust isn't safety at all, that assumptions can wound deeper than weapons, and that 1 second of fear can divide or teach depending on what people do next. Marcus didn't know if every neighbor had learned the lesson, but he knew he had spoken his truth. And that truth, he realized, would outlast any rumor, any headline, any whisper behind a curtain. Because stories like his carried a simple truth: it only takes a second to judge. But it also only takes a second to pause, breathe, and choose to see someone fully. And the next time that second came, he prayed his neighbors wouldn't waste it. At 34, Cole Mercer thought he had finally built the life he wanted: Peaceland, and a chance to raise cattle the way his father once dreamed. But when his new community's homeowners association turned from a neighborly body into a weapon of control, Cole found himself standing alone against rules that were never meant to protect him. What started as a simple disagreement over a fence soon revealed a web of prejudice, power, and intimidation. And when Cole uncovered a loophole, the HOA never expected the entire neighborhood would watch, as one man's stand for fairness shook the system to its core. If you want to know how one rancher fought back against corruption, hiding behind community rules, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because this is only the beginning. By the time Cole saw the shiny aluminum gate, the sun was just lifting over the mesquite, and the cattle were rubbing their noses along the fence line like they owned the morning. He killed the truck engine and listened to the quiet wind birds, the low thrum of a pump a field over. Peace had been the point of moving here out of Amarillo's noise into Coyote Willow Estates, the kind of development that sold 2-acre homestead lots, fronting a much larger pasture he'd scraped his savings to buy. The house and driveway sat inside the HOA boundary. The 60-acre grazing parcel sat directly behind it, outside the HOA. One narrow recorded easement, a gravel strip deeded decades ago, connected his driveway to the county road that skirted the subdivision's southern edge. The easement had always been open. Until today. A new powder-coated gate spanned the strip where it crossed HOA common area. The posts were sunk deep keypad on one side, HOA logo laser-cut across the crossbar. A laminated sign flapped in the breeze. Community Access Point, Coyote Willow HOA, authorized entry only. Contact the association for credentials. Cole climbed out, thumb dragging along the cold metal. Not his gate, not his lock. But squarely across the strip, his deed promised him the right to use. Two men in HOA polos were tightening hinge bolts. "Morning," Cole said, keeping it polite. "Who ordered the gate board, did one?" Answered. "Security measure." "My deeded easement runs through here," Cole said. "You can't block me from my own pasture." "No one's blocked," the other replied, nodding at the keypad. "You'll need a fob. Office approves them." Cole swallowed. "Who approves them?" "Talk to the board." He was still standing there when a white Lexus eased up. Deborah Lang, HOA president, stepped out in a cream blazer and sunglasses, clipboard under her arm like a gavel. He knew her reputation, emails signed, "For the integrity of our community finds," that read like sermon notes, a smile that rarely reached her eyes. "Mr. Mercer," she said, like a teacher taking attendance, "we've had a series of incidents at this access point, contractors, late-night traffic. The board authorized a gate for resident safety." "My cattle don't move on keypad schedules," Cole said. "You'll have a fob," she replied smoothly. "Once your account is reviewed and your exterior improvements are brought into compliance." "What improvements?" She flipped a page. Perimeter fencing visible from the roadway exhibits non-conforming aesthetics, unpainted posts, mismatched rails. Also, your stock tank near Lot 14 is an unapproved accessory structure. "It's a stock tank," Cole said. "Coyote Willow has standards," Deborah said. "We must be consistent. We can't simply allow exceptions because someone is used to doing things a certain way." The italics hit hard. Cole had already seen white neighbors skate past with unapproved sheds, mismatched fences, even a neon pink playhouse. No letters, no fines, no gates. Consistency, Cole said flatly, would mean you measuring everyone's fence. "Let's keep this civil," Deborah said. "Sign the compliance plan. Paint, replace, relocate. 30 days. And until then, please avoid non-emergency traffic through this point. Our volunteer patrol will log entries." Neighbors watched from mailboxes, pretending not to. They always did. Cole chose the least dramatic thing. He pulled out his phone and snapped photos, gate sign, keypad, everything. Then he unfolded his deed from the glove box and ran a finger under easement B, recorded 1998 for ingress, egress, and utilities. "Email me the compliance plan," he said. "And while we go back and forth, give me a temporary code. My animals won't wait 10 business days." Deborah's smile didn't move. "Expect a response within 10 business days." When he returned from checking troughs, the gate was chained and the keypad beeped a little electronic no. A new email pinged his phone. "Until compliance is confirmed, access credentials will be deferred. Non-emergency use of the gate is prohibited." Cole stood in the heat chain, heavy in his hand, and exhaled slow. "Fine," he thought. "We'll keep it civil." And he went home to start a file. At first, Cole Mercer thought the fight was just about a gate. But when he walked into his very first HOA meeting, he realized the gate was only the beginning. What he uncovered inside that clubhouse wasn't just petty rulemaking, it was a system designed to silence people like him. And when he refused to sit quietly, the board decided to make an example out of him. If you've ever wondered how far a homeowners association can go when power goes unchecked, keep watching, because the fight for Cole's land was about to turn personal. The Coyote Willow HOA held its monthly meeting in the community clubhouse a low beige building that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and stale coffee. A paper sign taped to the door read, "Board Meeting Residents. Welcome. Public comment. Limited to 3 minutes." Cole arrived early, deed folder tucked under his arm, a knot tightening in his chest. He wasn't the kind of man who sought out microphones or spotlights, but this wasn't optional anymore. His cattle needed that water access, and every day the gate stayed locked cost him time and money. Inside the board sat at a folding table 5 of them in a neat row. At the center was Deborah Lang, crisp blazer, again smile polished for the crowd. To her left was Dennis Wheeler, a retired banker who loved quoting bylaws like scripture. To her right sat Carolyn Briggs, who rarely spoke but nodded whenever Deborah did. 2 other board members younger kept their eyes down like kids hoping the teacher wouldn't call on them. The audience filled the plastic chairs, neighbors fanning themselves with newsletters whispering. Cole spotted Hank Morales, the HVAC guy, leaning against the wall, eyes down. And behind him, Mrs. Garner, the realtor, who offered Cole a sympathetic half-smile before folding her arms. Deborah opened with the agenda: landscaping budgets, pool repairs, community events. Every item passed with nods and polite claps. But when security and access came up, Deborah's voice sharpened. As many of you know, she began the board-authorized installation of a security gate on the southern easement. This measure is to ensure resident safety following multiple incidents of suspicious activity. Cole stood. "That gate is on my recorded easement. Your chain is keeping me from my own pasture." Deborah's smile didn't falter. "Mr. Mercer residents will have access credentials once their properties are in compliance. Your exterior improvements are currently out of code." Cole pulled the folder from under his arm and flipped it open. "My deed says otherwise. Easement B, recorded 1998. It grants ingress and egress without condition." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Dennis Wheeler leaned into the mic. "Sir, rules are rules. If we let one resident skirt standards, we set a dangerous precedent." Cole shot him a look. Dangerous precedent, like the unpainted shed behind Lot 7, or the golf cart that runs 40 in a 25, or the bright blue fence at Lot 3 that's been standing 3 years? The room shifted. Heads turned. Some residents frowned, others smirked knowingly. "That's different," Dennis said stiffly. "How?" Cole demanded. "Different, because they're violations you're comfortable ignoring, or because the folks behind those fences don't look like me." Silence. Heavy choking. Deborah tapped her pen against the clipboard. "Mr. Mercer, your time is up. Please submit your concerns in writing to the Compliance Committee. This meeting is not the place for accusations." Cole's jaw tightened. "This is exactly the place. You've locked me out of my land. That's not compliance, that's harassment." Carolyn Briggs finally spoke, voice soft but sharp. "Maybe if you showed more willingness to fit in, things would go smoother." Fit in. 2 words that landed like stones. Cole felt the weight of a dozen stares, some sympathetic, others hostile, all of them waiting to see if he'd back down. He didn't. "I'm not here to fit into your double standards. I'm here to work my land." Deborah's smile hardened into something else. "Then I suggest you cooperate with the compliance plan. Until then, no credentials will be issued." The gavel, plastic, not wood, came down on the table. Meeting adjourned. Neighbors spilled into the night air, voices low but urgent. Some shook their heads. Some avoided Cole's eyes. But a few lingered, quiet handshakes murmured support. One slipped him a folded note. "You're not the only one they've targeted." Cole tucked it into his pocket, heart pounding. The gate wasn't just about cattle anymore. It was about power and who was allowed to use it. And the board had just drawn their line in the sand. Cole Mercer thought the HOA would back off after he challenged them at the meeting. Instead, they doubled down. Letters, fines, and warnings began landing in his mailbox like clockwork. But it wasn't just paperwork. The harassment followed him everywhere. And while his white neighbors got a free pass, Cole was treated like a criminal in his own community. The first violation letter arrived 3 days after the meeting. Notice of non-compliance stock tank visible from Lot 14. Must be removed within 30 days. Fine $50 per day thereafter. Cole held the paper in one hand and stared out the window at the tank, a galvanized oval no different from 100 others across the county. His cattle drank from it. His father had welded the frame himself. It wasn't an improvement, it was survival. The second letter came 2 days later. Notice of non-compliance. Perimeter fencing non-conforming. Paint or replace within 30 days. Fine $25 per day thereafter. By the end of the week, 3 more notices piled on weeds too tall along the drainage ditch equipment trailer parked in view, and even a citation for leaving his truck on the gravel turnout overnight. Cole kept each envelope dated and stacked in a file. Meanwhile, he noticed what the HOA didn't notice. Across the street, the Jeffersons' lawn, was a jungle no letter. Behind Lot 7, the unpainted shed leaned like it might fall over no letter. At Lot 3, the bright blue fence glared in the sun, still unapproved, still ignored. And at night, the same golf cart screeched by with teenagers, laughter echoing no patrol notes, no complaints. It was selective enforcement. And Cole knew why. One Saturday morning, as he loaded feed bags from his truck, a man in a reflective vest pulled up in a golf cart. The vest had volunteer patrol stamped on the back. He was older, balding, with a clipboard balanced on his knees. "You can't park here overnight," the man said. "Violation." Cole wiped his hands. "This is my driveway turnout. My truck was here one night. Rules are rules." The man scribbled on his form. "HOA can tow, if it happens again." Cole leaned against the tailgate. "You log the golf cart that does 40 down here every night." The man looked up, frown deepening. "That's different." "How?" The volunteer's eyes flicked away. "We're just here to keep order." "Whose order?" Cole asked. No answer, just the squeak of tires as the cart rolled away. The fines mounted. By the end of the month, Cole's HOA account balance showed $1.425 in penalties. Deborah Lang sent him a letter threatening a lien on his property if he didn't comply. Cole didn't take the bait. He spent his nights gathering proof instead. He photographed the blue fence. He filmed the golf cart racing after midnight. He cataloged every non-conforming shed, every junk pile, every unpainted board that never drew a citation. And he wasn't the only one. One evening, Hank Morales, the HVAC guy, walked up while Cole was fixing a gate latch. He glanced around, voice low. "They hit me last year," Hank said. "Said my work van was a commercial vehicle. I fought it, but they threatened my wife with court. Paid the fine just to keep peace." "Why not speak up?" Cole asked. Hank shook his head. "You've seen how they are. They find reasons. Easier to pay and move on." Cole nodded. He understood fear. But he also knew silence only fed the system. That night he pulled out the folded note from the meeting. "You're not the only one they've targeted." He realized he wasn't fighting just for his own cattle anymore. He was fighting for everyone too afraid to stand up. The breaking point came when Cole returned from town one afternoon to find his cattle bawling at the fence line. The stock tank on the far pasture sat bone dry. The gate was still chained keypad blinking red. Without water, the herd would weaken fast. Cole drove to the clubhouse file folder in hand jaw set. Inside, Deborah and Dennis were holding office hours. They looked up as he entered. "My cattle don't drink bylaws," Cole said, dropping the violation stack on the table. "Unlock the gate. Today." Deborah folded her hands. We've explained the process. Until compliance. Cole cut her off. Until compliance, or until you drive me out. Silence. Her smile flickered, then returned cold as glass. You have options, she said. Sell, relocate, or comply. Cole leaned forward, voice steady. There's a fourth option. Fight. He turned and walked out, leaving the stack of violations like evidence at a crime scene. The board thought they were bleeding him dry with paper cuts. They didn't know Cole was already planning something bigger, something that would turn their own rules against them. By now, Cole Mercer had been buried in violation letters and threats of liens. The HOA believed they had cornered him, that he'd either fold or sell. But late one night, while sifting through county records, Cole discovered something the board never expected. The very ground their gate stood on wasn't legally theirs to control. And with that discovery, the balance of power began to shift. If you've ever wanted to see how one overlooked detail can unravel an entire system, keep watching, because Cole just found his first weapon. Cole spread the documents across his kitchen table. Deed records, easement maps, and plats yellowed with time. His laptop screen glowed with the county clerk's database, each scanned PDF like a puzzle piece. He'd been chasing a hunch for days that the HOA didn't actually own the thin strip of land where they'd planted their shiny new gate. His hunch proved right. There it was, Parcel 12B, a narrow rectangle labeled Utility and Access Reserve. Ownership still listed under the original developer's dissolved company. No transfer. No record of the HOA ever taking title. In plain words, the HOA had no legal right to fence it. Cole leaned back in his chair, breath sharp. All their threats, their non-emergency access rules, their fines built on a gate planted in soil they didn't even own. He laughed low and bitter. Then he started printing. The next HOA meeting drew a larger crowd. Word had spread about Cole's showdown with Deborah and Dennis. Some came for drama, others for quiet solidarity. Cole walked in with a manila folder, thick with evidence, his boots heavy on the tile. Deborah opened the meeting with her usual polished tone, but her smile tightened when she saw him. Mr. Mercer, before we begin, please note that repeated disruptions will not be tolerated. Cole didn't sit. He stepped forward, folder in hand. You fined me $1,425 for so-called violations. You've chained a gate across my easement. Tonight, I'm here to show you something. He pulled out the plat map, unfolded it, and slapped it onto the table. The crowd leaned forward. This, he said, pointing, is Parcel 12B. The strip your gate sits on. According to county records, the HOA doesn't own it. Never has. Which means you had no authority to install that gate. And every fine you've tied to it, he spread his hands, legally worthless. Murmurs rippled through the room. Someone actually clapped before catching themselves. Dennis frowned, adjusting his glasses. That's absurd. The association maintains that land. Maintaining and owning aren't the same. Cole shot back. You can mow it all you want. Doesn't make it yours. Deborah's pen tapped the table sharp and fast. Mr. Mercer, you are misinterpreting legal documents. This meeting is not a courtroom. Then maybe it should be, Cole said. Because I've already spoken to a property attorney. If you don't remove that gate within 10 days, we'll see what a judge thinks of your interpretation. The silence that followed was heavy. Neighbors shifted in their seats. Some looked at Deborah, waiting for her polished confidence to steady them. Instead, for the first time, she faltered. Ladies and gentlemen, she said. Finally, voice stiff. The board will review these claims with counsel. Until then, all existing rules remain in place. Cole gathered his papers, turned, and faced the crowd. They want you to think they can control everything you do. But the law still matters. Don't forget that. He left the clubhouse to a scatter of quiet nods and whispered support. That night, Hank Morales knocked on his door. "Heard what you did," Hank said, grinning for the first time in weeks. Deborah looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Cole chuckled. "One battle. Not the war." Hank sobered. "Careful, Cole. Folks like her don't like losing. They'll come after you harder." Cole nodded. He knew Hank was right. He also knew he'd crossed a line. There was no going back to silence, not now. And sure enough, 2 days later, Cole found something new in his mailbox. Notice of hearing possible suspension of voting rights and community privileges. Grounds hostile conduct threats to board authority. Cole held the letter, the corners cutting into his palm. The HOA wasn't retreating. They were escalating. And this time, they weren't just targeting his land. They were targeting him. By now, Cole Mercer had proven the HOA wrong once, and that was enough to make him their #1 target. Deborah Lang and her board weren't just going to fight him with fines anymore. They were going to fight him with reputation fear and rumor. What Cole didn't realize was that the HOA wasn't only trying to break his bank, they were trying to break his standing in the very community he called home. But while they worked to turn his neighbors against him, Cole was busy building something the HOA never expected allies. It started with whispers. At the mailbox, Mrs. Garner avoided eye contact. At the gas station, 2 residents turned their backs when Cole walked in. At Sunday service, the pastor's handshake felt colder than usual. Then came the flyers, slipped under doors pinned to bulletin boards posted by the Pool Community Alert. Certain residents have engaged in hostile disruptive behavior against the HOA board and neighbors. Such actions threaten the peace, safety, and harmony of Coyote Willow Estates. Residents are urged to report violations immediately. No names printed, but everyone knew who it meant. Cole tore one down, crumpled it in his fist, and walked home in silence. That evening his phone buzzed. "Hank Morales again? They're saying you threatened Deborah," Hank said. Cole blinked. "What word's going around you stormed the meeting and yelled at her? That you," Hank hesitated, "that you said you'd make her pay." Cole's chest burned. "That's a lie. I showed her county records, Hank." "That's it," I know, Hank said. "But some folks will believe anything with the HOA's letterhead on it. Be careful." The smear worked. Neighbors who once waved now shut their doors. One woman crossed the street when Cole walked his fence line. Kids whispered when he drove past on his tractor. The HOA had turned him into a pariah, and that isolation was their strongest weapon. But not everyone bought the story. A week later, a knock came at his door. Cole opened it to find Jasmine Carter, a single mother from 3 streets over, clutching a folder. "I heard what they're doing to you," she said. "They tried the same with me last year. Said my deck wasn't approved. Fined me $500, then told everyone I was refusing to cooperate. My son stopped getting invited to birthday parties." Cole let her inside, poured coffee, and listened as she laid out her own folder of violation letters. Same handwriting, same arbitrary deadlines, same selective enforcement. "I paid just to make it stop," Jasmine said, voice tight. "But it never really did. They kept watching me." Cole nodded. "That's how they work. Isolate you, scare you, make you fold." Jasmine leaned forward. "Maybe we don't fold. Not if we stand together." Within days, more residents came quietly to Cole's porch. Hank brought copies of his commercial vehicle citations. Mrs. Garner slipped over after dark with photos of her neighbor's shed untouched, unpunished, while she'd been fined for leaving a wheelbarrow out. One by one, they added their stories to Cole's growing file. Different details, same pattern: harassment, intimidation, and lies. "They've been doing this for years," Hank muttered. "Most folks just roll over." "But if we show it's not just you," Cole finished his thought. "Then it's a pattern. And patterns don't hold up in court. The HOA wasn't blind. They noticed the quiet gatherings. They noticed lights burning late at Cole's house. And soon, a new letter landed in his box, notice of hearing consideration of civil penalties against resident Mercer for organizing against board authority. Cole read it twice, jaw tightening. Organizing against authority. That wasn't a violation. That was democracy. But Deborah had tipped her hand. She wasn't just trying to silence him. She was afraid of what he was building. That night, Cole stood on his porch file of evidence thick under his arm. He looked out over his pasture cattle silhouettes moving against the moonlight. The smear campaign had tried to make him the enemy. Instead, it had revealed just how many others were suffering under the same system. And Cole wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for every neighbor too scared to speak. The HOA wanted to turn him into an example. They were about to get one, just not the kind they expected. Cole Mercer had endured months of harassment, fines, and lies. The HOA thought they had crushed him with isolation and rumors. But what Deborah Lang and her board didn't realize was that Cole had been preparing quietly, building a case stronger than any smear campaign. And when the day of the hearing finally came, it wasn't Cole who was on trial, it was the HOA itself. If you've been waiting to see how one man can turn an entire corrupt system on its head, don't go anywhere, because this was the moment everything changed. The clubhouse was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls, neighbors spilling into the aisles. Some came for gossip, others for support, but everyone felt the tension. The agenda read, Hearing Civil Penalties Against Resident Mercer. Deborah Lang sat at the center of the board's table posture, straight, smile thin. Dennis Wheeler shuffled papers beside her, and Carolyn Briggs wore her usual nodding mask. Cole walked in carrying a thick binder. No folder this time, this was heavier, deliberate. He laid it on the table with a thud that silenced the room. Deborah cleared her throat. Mr. Mercer, this hearing concerns your repeated hostility toward the board and your failure to comply with community standards. You've disrupted meetings organized against the HOA and engaged in conduct unbecoming a resident. Cole didn't flinch. You're right about one thing, he said. I organized. But not against the HOA. Against abuse. He opened the binder, flipping page after page, photos, letters, witness statements. He turned to face the crowd. This is every violation letter I've received in the last 2 months. And here he held up a photo. The bright blue fence at Lot 3 is a violation ignored for 3 years. Here's the unpainted shed at Lot 7. Here's the golf cart breaking speed limits nightly. Not a single fine. Not a single notice. He laid out Hank's citations, Jasmine's letters, Mrs. Garner's photos. Different neighbors, same pattern. This isn't about compliance, Cole said, voice steady, but rising. It's about selective enforcement, harassment, and, in my case, racist intimidation. Gasps rippled through the room. Deborah's smile tightened. These are baseless accusations. The board acts only in the community's best interest. Cole cut her off. Then why does the county clerk show that Parcel 12B, the strip of land your gate sits on, was never transferred to the HOA? You don't even own the ground you're fining me over. You've been charging residents for rules you had no legal authority to enforce. The crowd erupted, murmurs, whispers, even a few angry shouts. Deborah slammed the gavel, plastic cracking on wood. Order! This is out of line. No, Cole said firmly, voice cutting through. What's out of line is threatening liens, spreading lies, and destroying neighbors' reputations. What's out of line is pretending power makes you right. And tonight, I'm done being silent. He reached into his binder and pulled out a final document, a stamped copy of his attorney's filing. This, he announced, is a complaint already filed with the county court for unlawful fines, defamation, and violation of property rights. You want to put me on trial? Fine. Let's do it in front of a judge. The room buzzed with shock. Neighbors turned to one another whispering. Some faces glowed with relief, others with anger, but all eyes were on Deborah, whose composure cracked for the first time. Dennis muttered something about legal review. Carolyn shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Deborah finally spoke, voice low, brittle. "This is not over, Mr. Mercer." Cole met her stare. "You're right," he said. "It's just beginning." Weeks later, the story broke wider than Coyote Willow Estates. Local papers picked it up, resident challenges, HOA over illegal gate harassment. Neighbors who once whispered now knocked on Cole's door, thanking him. Some even joined the lawsuit. The gate still stood, but the chain was gone. Court order. The cattle drank again. One evening, Cole stood by the pasture fence watching the herd gather around the refilled tank. Hank pulled up in his truck, leaning out the window with a grin. "You did it," Hank said. Cole shook his head. "We did it. All of us who stopped being quiet." For the first time in months, Cole felt the weight on his chest lift. The fight wasn't finished. Lawsuits dragged on, and the board still schemed, but the silence had been broken. And that was victory enough to start. Because sometimes it only takes one person refusing to back down to remind a whole community what real power looks like. And this time, it wasn't the board. It was the people.